CD 4.
Chapter 16. Alcohol wipes? McGrain looked through the closed window at the inside of the car. He sniffed the outside of the car door. His hand, hanging loose at his side, reflexively came forward, stopped, and dropped back. He'd been about to touch the handle. He looked at Kerrigan, who was watching him, and grinned, shocked at himself. She grinned back, showing off her pointy little teeth. McGrain turned his eyes back to the marks on the dashboard.
I can't catch the smell, but it does look like the sort of marks they leave.
OK, said Morrow, who'd been hoping for something a bit more insightful. Let's get it on the truck anyway. You due at the hospital at 2?
Cancelled, said McGrain. Emergency case, sent us a text.
That's annoying.
Well, probably not for the emergency case. Some poor old deer took a tumble or something.
You come to Helensburgh with me then. I've got some evidence that needs taken in. Thankless? He came over when he heard his name. I want you to take this into evidence. She gave him the evidence bag with the Waitrose freezer bag inside it. Have it tested and logged, OK? Procedurally, the fewer officers who handled a production before it was logged, the better, but she could see that Thankless felt he was being sent off for a misdemeanour. You were great today, she lied. Thanks for that. Torn between confused and chuffed, Thankless took the evidence bag and went off to the car. She told McGrain, before we set off, find out if Frank Delahunt's got a silver Ford Fiesta. Mr. Halliday was hanging about in the yard with the dogs. He was craning to watch them load the car onto the truck, but keen to give them space. Mr. Halliday, she said, walking over to him, just to be clear, how many cars do you think were here? Was it 2? His eyes glazed over and he thought about it.
Maybe 3.
Why 3? He looked at the ground.
I didn't see the tracks to that yesterday morning.
He pointed to the Alfa Romeo. He waved at a muddy patch where the dirt yard overlapped the tarmac on the road.
3-point turns, 2 lots. So I was thinking, there's 2 cars come, turned and gone. But that was wrong. There was 3.
They looked together at the indistinct mud, both rueing the overnight rain. Thanks, Mr. Halliday. She held out her hand and he shook it warmly. He walked with her back to the car.
And where's this you're off to now?
Helensburgh. Know of anywhere we can get lunch?
Chips or soup or what?
We roll?
Greg's. Can't go wrong.
McGrain was in the car waiting for her. Frank Delahunt didn't have a silver Ford Fiesta. He had a Jaguar. She filled him in on Halliday. 3 cars. Good guy. McGrain commented on the Yes campaign sign in the window, said he thought it was bad out here, and Morrow told him about the furiously contested gazebo. McGrain grinned.
God, everyone's going mad. And the man's wrong, there's going to be ructions after.
The chief had announced to the press that there was no overtime scheduled for officers. The campaigns had been peaceful, and they expected it would continue to be so. No one knew if he was hopeful or stupid.
He's from down south, though, isn't he? Observed McGrain.
Aye.
Doesn't know how far some of them will go for a fight up here.
It occurred to her that McGrain was probably against independence, judging from the phrases down south and up here instead of England and Scotland. Even within the police force, the referendum had heightened the atmosphere of paranoia and mistrust, reducing them all to hyper-vigilant readings of their neighbours' microsignals. They drove on towards the town, passing through pretty coastal villages with signs for tea rooms and conservation areas, past mini delis and newsagents advertising broadsheet newspapers. Looking across the car park to a large Waitrose, Moro thought of the bag in the glove box. Waitrose was incongruously posh for a baggie. She wondered if it might be worth tracing freezer bag purchases from the supermarket, but realised it would be pointless. They must sell loads of them. McGrain told her what the forensic accountant had found at the Injury Claims for You office. Nothing much. Potentially fraudulent claims were minimal. As soon as Fuentesilla arrived, she started laying off staff and winding the office down. Everyone had been laid off. The bills had all been paid and the lights were going out next Friday. It was completely unexpected. Is she changing the business?
There's no sign of that on the books, said McGrain. It looks like she's just shutting down the office. We can't find anything else she's moving into. She's just leaving it dormant.
Is she asset stripping?
They didn't find any assets. The office is rented. The furniture's worth nothing.
Where's the $7 million gone?
Gone from the bank account, but they haven't found it yet.
They had no excuse to stay in. She called the office and gave them a message for the accountant. Photograph everything and get out quickly. Don't draw attention. She hung up, paused for a moment with her eyes shut, thinking about alcohol wipes. She rubbed her fingertips along her thumb, remembering stickiness and a fine grain. It was a professional job, done by a fairly competent trained party. They were trying to get away. She opened her eyes and sat up and found she was smiling. They were coming into Helensburgh on an inauspicious dual carriageway, passing old tenements, new builds and factory-style nursing homes. They passed forecourts to petrol stations, a gas storage tank, and then, abruptly, entered the town of Helensburgh. A long parade of Georgian houses and shops faced the water. Moro saw then what Mr. Halliday was talking about. Every street lamp had a purple "No Thanks" sign on it. Many of the shops had the sign propped in their windows. The esplanade along the shoreline was perfectly paved, but devoid of people. There were only 3 buildings on the waterside, all tucked away around the ferry dock. A small council swimming pool, an unattractive concrete box of a pub, boarded up, and a small ticket office for the ferry. "Take a right here," said Moro. McGrain turned uphill into a suddenly busy street. They passed a chemist's and a newsagent's, a train station and a big church. A block away they saw a big, wide square with a white tent covered in "Better Together" signs. McGrain pointed at it and shouted, "Gazebo!" joyfully, as if it was a driving game. Moro got him to park outside a cafe. It was warm inside and old-fashioned, pale cream walls and a dusky blue counter. They had ordered before Moro noticed that it wasn't a nice old cafe. It was a cafe that was made to look nice and old. The customers were mostly women of a certain age wearing jumpers of a certain price. Their bacon rolls arrived, £6 each. Out in the car with a bag of hot rolls, they ate in a stunned silence. £6, said Moro. That's the price of 2 packets of bacon. McGrain looked accusingly at his lunch.
We'd just passed a Greg's as well.
Moro rolled the bacon around her mouth, waiting for the extra special flavour to kick in. It didn't. It was just bacon. Maybe her palate wasn't sophisticated enough. She put the last bite in her mouth, brushed her hands clean, and pointed him onto Delahunts. All of the houses were built looking out to sea, like football fans on a stand, each handsome villa staring at its downhill neighbour's backside. Uphill, well-kept front lawns ran towards them. Downhill was an ugly composition of garages and wheelie bins and back walls. The streets had no pavements, just grass verges with occasional paths walked through them. They took a street overhung with heavy trees, chainsawed into geometric voids at lorry clearance height.
Christ, said McGreen. It's swanky out here.
She shared his analysis more than Thankless's. They parked on a grass verge and got out. Delahunt's house was uphill through a locked metal gate. Morrow pressed the button on an intercom, quite new and sleek, and waited. Stone steps curved up to the lawn beyond the wrought iron gate. A pause. Frank Delahunt was in and wanted to know who was there.
Hello, Mr. Delahunt. We're from Police Scotland. Can we come in and have a word, please, sir?
He hesitated.
What's this concerning? Can we come in, please, sir?
Another pause, and then the gate dropped open. Morrow pushed it and climbed the 4 steps. A long stretch of immaculately striped grass led up to a yellow sandstone house. A set of slim French windows looking onto the garden opened, and Mr. Y, familiar from the photographs, stepped out to greet them. Delahunt always dressed in red or pink trousers and a dress shirt. Sometimes he wore a yellow tweed jacket, sometimes a mossy green cardigan with brown elbow patches. Today he wore neither, but had folded his shirt sleeves up carefully, as if he was working. Looking up at him, Morrow realised that she'd always assumed he was gay because he wore so many colours. But seeing him now, his legs apart stance in the doorway, his slightly pissed-off rugby player glare, she wondered if he could have been having an affair with Roxana. It would make sense of the 5 a.m. phone call in a moment of crisis. Delahunt watched them walk towards him, raising his hand in a tentative greeting, dropping it before they got halfway up to him.
Mr. Delahunt, I'm D.I. Alex. I'd much rather you had come around the other entrance, he said, his accent clipped and rounded. This is not the actual entrance to the property.
Morrow followed his eyeline back to the lawn and saw their twin sets of footprints through the wet grass. It was for looking at, apparently, not for walking on.
Well, I'm sorry about that, but this is the address we got for you.
She pointed back to the street where they had parked, saw the sweeping view of the sea from the house, marred only by the roofs of the houses downhill.
Well, the damage is done now, he said magnanimously. Do come in, D.I. Alex, won't you?
It didn't seem like the time to correct him. He ushered them through the double doors into a study lined with books. In the middle of the room stood a big square desk, dark wood with a green leather top. The desk had workstations on each of its 4 sides, open books and papers ready for attention. The chair had been pulled back to a neutral position near the door, but Morrow followed the furrows through the ornamental rug to a position at the desk that faced straight out onto the lawn. It was where he had been until a minute ago, she could tell, because his mobile phone was sitting on a book, waiting it open. It was a gorgeous room, high yellow walls and a crisp white cornice, but Delahunt didn't want them to linger in there. He stood by the door, arms out, like a militant guide in a stately home, shepherding them into the hall. His insistence made Morrow suspicious. McGrane followed the path drawn out by Delahunt's arms, but Morrow nipped right and skirted the long way around the desk.
Good heavens, said McGrane with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. What an amazing house!
He had stopped, apparently mesmerised by the segmented plasterwork on the ceiling, drawing Delahunt's attention away from Morrow. He was quite good, McGrane.
What date is this house?
Delahunt kept his hands out to usher, but still seemed pleased to have been asked. He followed McGrane's eye to the ceiling.
1822. My family have lived here for 4 generations. This street was laid out as part of a development. He talked on, telling Migraine about the street and the building. Migraine was doing a good job of acting interested. Or maybe he really was. Mauro didn't know him well, but she took the chance to glance at the book under the mobile phone. A heading caught her eye. The body. Would you, Delahunt was asking, come through? She looked up. Migraine had run out of moves and Delahunt wasn't taking his eyes off her. Of course, she said, and followed him. Delahunt led on and she glanced down to the main heading at the top of the page. Succession. General Issues. The hall was dominated by a wooden stairwell that had been stripped and then glossily over-varnished. We could sit here. He waved them to a seating area under the stairs. Migraine and Mauro sat next to each other on a padded bench that was slightly too small. Delahunt pulled over a chair. They were sitting in the void under the stairwell, a small cubbyhole in a massive, apparently empty house. It felt strange. It felt suspicious. Roxana could be tied up or hiding. Mauro found herself listening intently. Delahunt raised his eyebrows expectantly, reaching into his trouser pocket to take out a cigarette case and a slim gold lighter. You're not local police officers. Are you from Glasgow? Mauro nodded. Not a spate of break-ins, then? No. Mauro watched him flick the lighter, waiting until he was touching the flame to the tip of his cigarette. Roxana Fuentesilla. Delahunt's hand shook, but only a fraction. He exhaled and raised an eyebrow. So sorry. What is it you're asking me? You know her? He gave a little nod. She's disappeared. Mauro met his eye. No one knows where she is. We know that she phoned you yesterday. She waited for him to speak. It took longer than she expected. He leaned carefully over to a small table, picked up an ashtray, and set it on his knee. He looked up at her, as if surprised she was still there. I don't know what you want. When did you last see her? He mumbled, Thursday, in Glasgow. They had been seen together in Byres Road. It was at least partly true. Mr. Delahunt, as far as we know, you're the last person to have contact with her before she disappeared. What happened yesterday morning? Delahunt tapped his cigarette into the ashtray, blinking in time as he did. Phone call, he muttered. Speak up, please. I got a phone call from her. What time? 5-ish. And? She asked me to come and pick her up. Mauro waited again. Delahunt waited. Migraine shifted in his seat. If Delahunt was a practised conman, he would have known how to fill the space, but he didn't. He tried smoking and tapping non-existent ash before he blurted, I went, but she wasn't there. Then I came home. What did she say on the phone exactly? I'm in Halliday's field. Come and get me. And you said? He held her eye as he raised a hand to the ceiling. I'll come and get you. And then I went, and she wasn't there, and I came home. What sort of car do you have? Jaguar SX. What colour is it? Burgundy. Mauro was conscious that she had taken quite an intense dislike to Frank Delahunt. She had a chip on her shoulder, was more comfortable interviewing working-class people. She was frightened about Danny. She just paid £6 for a bacon roll. But over and above all of that,
There was something about the precision of Delahunt's mannerisms and his dress, about the smallness of his physical gestures that made her slightly furious. She tried to read him carefully. It wasn't just class resentment that made her angry. It was his disdain. She saw him take in her cheap coat and patent leather shoes, rimmed with mud. She saw him glance towards Migraine's bitten nails and iron shiny trousers. She saw him think they were cheap and stupid. She wanted to prove him wrong. Halliday's Field, where is that? It's up the coast road towards Glasgow. What was she doing there? I don't know. You didn't ask? No. But you knew where she was talking about when she used the expression Halliday's Field. Why? It's a known place. She's Spanish. She moved to Glasgow from London a couple of months ago. It must be very well known. He shrugged and smoked, legs and arms crossed in a posture so defensive she felt certain she'd be back here with a warrant. Did you ask why she was phoning at 5 a.m? No. Was it an expected call? No. Morrow looked around the hall. Everything was tidy, symmetrical. A bowl of tiger lilies on a table by the front door had the orange stamens pulled off so that they couldn't brush against a sleeve and stain a shirt. Everything was precisely placed in here. No piles of coats, shoes. Nothing by accident. Frank Delahunt wasn't the guy you phoned when something unexpected happened at 5 in the morning. Were you having an affair with her? No. Calm at the suggestion. Not even suppressed desire simmering there. After the phone call, what did you do? I got dressed. Pause for a draw on the cigarette. I came downstairs. Exhale. I put my shoes on. Tap on the ashtray. I got in my car and I went there. His eyes came back to hers and narrowed. This was at 5 in the morning. He nodded. 5:30. I got there and she'd left. I called and she'd switched her phone off. Was there another car there? That made his right eye twitch. No. Sure? Absolutely, there was no one there. She'd just driven away. He hadn't seen Roxana's car. Where did you think she'd gone? An awful stillness had come over Delahunt. Mr. Delahunt? I thought she'd run off. Why would she do that? I don't know. I don't know her personal affairs. I work for her company. Doing what? General legal advice. Her car was found near the field this morning. She must have left with someone else in another car. Do you know who that would be? Robin? Her partner could have come and collected her. He has a car, I believe. She wouldn't leave her own car, hidden behind a shed and wiped for fingerprints, though, would she? He was shocked by that. It might have... He broke off, and she saw that his forehead was suddenly a little damp. What were you going to say? Her car might have broken down, but that doesn't explain. Yeah, said Morrow, as if confiding. It doesn't explain. You can see why we're worried. Does she know anyone else in Helensburgh? No. He seemed very sure. How did you come to be her lawyer? Bob Ash recommended me. He owned injury claims for you before Roxana? Yes. Where's Mr. Ash now? He retired to Miami. Grandchildren. His lip curled in a sneer. Morrow didn't think Frank Delahunt hated grandchildren. He was shocked and a little bit frightened for Roxana, and it was making him behave strangely. "Where is she, Frank?" He looked out over the lawn to the sea, sucked hard on his cigarette, so hard that his eyes narrowed.
"I don't know."
Morrow pointed back to the study door. "In there. There's a textbook. Can I look at it?"
He huffed a nervous laugh. "Textbooks are in the public domain, aren't they?"
Preempting any objections, she got up and walked quickly into the study. Delahunt followed swiftly behind. The section headed "The Body" outlined the legal requirements for disposal of a dead person, but the mobile phone was not placed to let him read that. It was balanced precariously over the top of the page, clearing the paragraph below. She put her finger on the section and looked at him.
"That," he was flustered, "that's not about her. I'm not—"
Delahunt ran out of bullshit. Morrow read it out to Migraine, standing in the doorway.
"If a person simply disappears so that there is no body—" Delahunt couldn't look at her. "Where is she, Frank?"
He mustered all of his disdain to look at her through half-shut eyes.
"As I said, I'm legal advisor to the firm she owns. It's my job to be aware of the legal implications of any developments and anticipate them." "She wasn't there when you went to meet her, and that prompted you to look up the legal conditions for the property of a dead and missing person. You're all heart, Mr. Delahunt."
He looked at the floor.
"As a matter of interest, Mr. Delahunt, what are the legal implications of a person simply disappearing?"
He shrugged as if he wasn't really all that interested.
"Well, it tells you there."
"What does it tell me?" He didn't want to say it, but then he did.
"If they're still missing after 7 years, they can be declared legally dead."
"This book is about succession. What happens to her property?"
"Just normal. Her family inherit her property. Just normal stuff." He smiled miserably. "You can buy the book yourself if you're that interested. It's widely available."
He smiled at Migraine, looking for an ally.
Migraine looked away.
"But you're not the family lawyer, Mr. Delahunt. You're the company lawyer. What happens to the property in the company?" They both knew the answer. It reverted to the investors. And if it took 7 years to declare Roxana dead, the money would be held for 7 years, her property untouchable, unconfiscatable, until there was a declaration of death. 7 years was a long time in the memory of the criminal justice system. Arius might have everything but the fillings in his mouth confiscated, but they wouldn't get that 7 million because wherever it wasn't his. Yet.
"I'm afraid I have a client arriving shortly. I'll have to ask you to leave, officers."
Chapter 17. The fly-zapping electric buzz from the intercom startled Ian so much he almost threw up. He wasn't used to the sound, had few visitors, and he was feeling fairly seasick anyway. Marooned on his bed after a long night of broken sleep and unaccustomed smoking, he'd been up since 4 watching house improvement programmes, drinking pint after pint of tap water and wishing he could stop smoking. He was looking forward to the tobacco running out. The buzzer sounded again. Zzz, zzz, double buzz. 2 dead flies, and Ian thought shit as he edged himself to the end of his unmade bed. He used the remote to shut the telly off and stood up. His flat was on the attic floor of an old tenement block. The ceiling was head-skimming. It hadn't been a flat before the housing service renovated the building. It had been empty roof space, but dormer windows and insulation meant that they had no reason to ignore the hollow corridor above the proper flats. Plastered and partitioned, it had been developed into a tiny, easy-to-manage studio flat. The dormer windows were unforgiving, though, the daylight relentless. Ian stood up into a viscous swirl of suffocating smoke. He shut his smarting eyes against it, felt himself drowning and swooned forward, catching himself before he fell. Shit, shit, shit. Hands out in front of him like a B-movie mummy, he waded to the window and opened it. Wind from the hills stormed the room, chasing smoke into corners, sucking it out of the window. Ian backed up to the intercom by the front door. "Who is that?" "Ian, is that you? It's Murray." "Murray who?" A moment's hesitation. "Murray who? What fucking Murray do you think it is, you dick?" "Aye, right enough." Ian pressed the buzzer and let him in. He waited at the door to save himself coming all the way back over here again. Murray. Nice one. He was glad that it wasn't yesterday when Murray came up, glad it was today. Murray wouldn't like the smoking, that was for sure, but Ian would be able to look him in the eye today because overnight, in the long hours of smoking, Ian had come to a truth about yesterday. He killed that woman. There were no softening justification, no narrative antecedents. When he saw her scream and run, he gave her a massive head injury. Massive head injury. Ian understood his place in the story, this circular story, and knew he had found it overwhelming because of Sheila. He was the bad man who hit women's heads, and the pity of his background didn't fix any of that today. His sad childhood and what he did, they were bits of two different jigsaws. Plenty came from worse than him. Murray came from worse than him. And the pain in his chest, that wasn't her. It was himself struggling not to admit it all. He admitted it now, though, and there was a peace in that. He might be a piece of shit, but he wasn't a lying piece of shit. Ian answered a flurry of knocks on the door. Damp and breathless from the 6th-flight climb, Murray fell into the room, swiping and cursing at the stinking air. He went over to the window and opened it wide to the heavens. Fucking hell! It's absolutely fucking honking in here. Ian couldn't really move very well, stiff from the bed and smoking and lack of sleep, but he smiled as he watched Murray slapping at air. Murray was Ian's lifelong friend, and here is the story of Murray. Murray went with a girl, and she had a baby, and that baby was Leanne. Leanne's mother went to Bristol to live with a man she met on the internet. She left the baby with Murray. Leanne was the making of all of them. Murray brought her to visit Ian in prison when she was a baby, when she was a chubby toddler chewing the edge off the table, when she was a girl dressed in the pink puffs and frills of prettier girls. Ian was a doting ne'er-do-well, her cautionary tale uncle. The mother's mother, Eunice, and Murray's mother, Annie, became the best of pals. From these discarded bits and unravelled scraps, Murray pulled a family together to form a wall around the child. Leanne was growing up with never a cause to doubt that she was the absolute fulcrum of every life around her. They were all performing the same miracle, repairing the insult of their own childhoods by making it all right for her. Murray was looking at him. "The fuck you doing smoking?" Ian shrugged. "Just smoking." "Well, don't," ordered Murray. Ian couldn't think what to say to that. Murray was right, so he said, "OK, I'll stop now." That settled, Murray waved at the air in front of him again, but it wasn't that smoky in the room anymore, just windy. He just did it for something to do. Where were you yesterday? Ian didn't want to talk about the morning.
Remember Susan Grierson?
No. Murray kicked at a dirty plate on the floor. State of this place.
Her that took the Scouts years ago. Went to America.
No.
Well, she's back. I met her.
Well, I still don't remember who the fuck she is, so I don't know why you're telling me about meeting her. He wasn't in a very good mood.
What's the matter?
Murray slumped down on the edge of the bed. Tommy fucking Farmer came to see us there, hanging about, waiting on us coming out of the sailors. He looked up at Ian, red-eyed, and Ian felt as though his lungs were turning to stone.
Do you know?
Ian was looking for disgust in Murray's face. He'd be furious if Tommy had told or hinted, but all he saw was fear. Mark's away. Murray's chin convulsed. He's in Barcelona. No. Ian sat down next to him. No, man, that doesn't mean that. Murray, it's clear. That won't happen. Tommy's as good as said it's happening. Murray. Ian touched him on the hand, skin to skin, uncomfortably intimate. They both winced away. Ian curled his fingers into his palm. No, no, no. Soothing, calming. I've cleared the debt with Mark. It's good. It's sorted out. Murray owed Mark $5,000. He should have paid it back by now. He planned to remortgage the pub once it was open, but the building work had dragged on and on. Murray got a last warning, but Ian had cleared it. Murray was in the clear. Knowing Mark, knowing Ian, Murray looked scared. What? Ian sucked a click through his teeth. Nothing, man, nothing. Ian, what have you done? High voice, guilty face. I've did nothing. But Murray wasn't stupid, and $5,000 was a fuck of a lot of money. He knew Ian had done something. $5,000's worth of something. Murray was overwhelmed, frightened for Ian, teary and spluttering. Ian, man, what have you fucking done? I've did nothing. Ian's voice came out so strangle-high, he sounded like the small, scared boys they had been, hiding in muddy ditches from bigger boys, boys with dads and brothers, boys with dinners on tables and sheets on their beds. They cowered under the pitiless wind from the hills reeling above their heads. Murray bit his lip hard to stop himself crying. Ian had sorted it out for him, made it safe for him, and he didn't have the words to express what he felt. Ian understood. He'd always understood Murray. Ian had the brawn and the courage, but Murray was the warm heart of their ramshackle family. Ian knew what he was feeling. Ian nodded, encouraging. You okay? Oh, man. No? For the wee hen? Murray shook his head. He was sad. He didn't want it this way. Financial security for Leanne, riding lessons for Leanne, maybe a private school when she got to secondary. He whispered, Just set a fire for him, Ian. Don't do that. They'll Carstairs you for that, man. Ian got up quickly, his back pain stabbing him, making him bend sideways and shut one eye. Oh, fucking hell. No fires, bud. Just, fuck, that's sore. Murray stood up. Hurt your back? Don't know how I did it. He pointed Murray to the door. Go on and fuck off, okay? I'll go and check it's clear with wee Paul. Murray opened the door to the close and stood, looking at Ian. He meant to say something, thanks or something, but none of the words he could think of were big enough. I was wearing a yes badge when Tommy saw me.
Don't worry about that. Tommy's a yes.
Murray nodded. I know, but would he grass us to Mark?
No, said Ian. He's para about Mark finding out about him.
You registered?
Aye. Ian wasn't.
You yes?
Course.
It's for the Waynes. For their future.
OK.
OK. Murray pointed a finger up at Ian's nose as he shuffled out the door. Don't smoke.
I'll not smoke any more.
You're a good man, Ian, said Murray. He'd never said anything like that to Ian, and it made Ian want to cry.
No, I'm not. Go on away with you.
He closed the door after Murray and listened to his fading steps. The pain throbbed in his back. He shut his eyes and saw Murray standing in a pew at Sheila's funeral, 2 rows behind, little wave. Ian was not a good man. He deserved nothing in this life. They rolled her body over the side. The water folded in softly around her, and they stood, looking, unable to see deeper than half a foot down. Ian imagined her falling through the black to the deep bed of the loch, to keep company with bits of 1,000-year-old boats and beer cans and langoustine. The skin on his hand was tight and dry, stained with brown, bloody water. How to get blood out of material? Salt, cold water, and soak. Advice from Sheila during his baffling tumble into adulthood. When a girl becomes a woman, she said, as if Ian was a girl, the very first thing you learn is how to get blood out of clothes. A basin of water on their old bathroom floor. Green, tiled floor, the same dirty green as the sea after a storm. The basin had a scum on the surface, salt crystals clinging together in drifting clouds, blindly feeling for the edge. Sheila's underpants, fibres swollen from being left to soak. Salt lifts blood. It made him flinch away from the basin. He didn't understand why she had blood on her pants. He knew later, of course, but not at that time. He wondered now, if she had a brain injury, would she be able to remember how to get blood out of pants? He didn't know. But giving her son advice about periods, that sort of suggested that she did have a brain injury. The trail of thoughts took him back to Susan Grierson. When Susan Grierson taught him to sail, he didn't even try. She squeezed his arm. Don't worry about it. You've got a lot on your mind. Just enjoy the water. Susan wanted him to think her kind and good. Ian refused to think that because she was pushing it so hard. It was the only power he had back then, refusal. Now he thought of Susan Grierson, across the sea for 20 years, washed back up here like salt-dried wood. Where had she been all this time? Not Chicago, they'd established that much. Ian didn't care who she was then, and he didn't know who she was now, but he knew that she was different. The Susan Grierson then wouldn't buy 3 grams of cocaine at once. She wouldn't live in a dust-dirty house or wait outside a newsagent or show you a plastic bag full of biscuits. Everything about her was off. Maybe everything about him was too. Maybe that's just what time did to people. Time in the water. He opened his eyes and felt lighter, physically weakened, but clear. He'd go to Mark Barrett's house and ask wee Paul about Murray and the sailors, just to be sure. Chapter 18. Morrow and McGrain had trouble getting in to see the local cops. The station was locked up. They banged on the door to get access, but no one heard them. The number for it went straight through to an answer phone. Eventually, they called London Road Station, got them to call direct and tell them to let them in. Stations were shutting everywhere to save money. Points of contact were fewer and fewer. Police cubicles had been set up in A&E wards, in 24-hour supermarkets. Mobile units were parked near streets of drinkers at closing time, but for Morrow that wasn't real policing. Real policing meant being part of a community. A surly uniform opened the door to let them in, warming up when they showed him their badges and asked to see the officer in charge. He told them to wait at the old front bar. It was a small cop shop, old-fashioned and typical of the town, was partly functional, partly museum piece. A high, dark wood counter formed a barrier between the back office and the waiting room. Displayed around the walls were the same posters they had up in the London Road Station. Alcoholism, burglary, be theft aware, Crime Stoppers. No photo fits here, though. No appeals for public help or participation because the public weren't allowed in. Morrow had been warned that Argyll and Bute were spread thin. They had a rota of 6 staff covering a very wide geographical area, 1 DI and 2 cars. The uniformed young man came back out. He led them into the back office and sat them down while he went to look for his boss, D.I. Simmons. Inside, the office was small and cluttered. 3 desks were piled high with papers and forms and leave slips and case files. Boxes of papers were stacked up on top of one another against the wall under the window. There was no one else there. A computer at the back of the room showed a game of solitaire in mid-commission. Right next to it was a pile of paperwork. Bad discipline. The uniformed officer came back, and his boss came around the corner. D.I. Simmons was a nippy-faced woman. Her hair was short and sternly set, her lips pursed. The skirt and blouse she wore were so functional they made her look as if she craved a uniform. She gave a stage sigh and stomped towards them. Morrow stood up, using her height for once, and held her hand out. Simmons shook it, squeezing too hard. "And what can I do for you today?" she snipped, as if they'd wasted a grotesque amount of her time already. "We'd like to ask you about the local vicinity. Wondered if you might help us with a missing persons inquiry." "Why?" "The missing person phoned a local from Halliday's Field." Simmons frowned. "Where's that?" "Can we talk in your office?" A tidy room, small, stacks of boxes in a neat brick-like arrangement against the wall. She explained to Morrow that a pipe had burst upstairs and they were only using half of their accommodation presently. She spoke like a rookie on their first time in court, precise, wordy, jarringly immellifluous. Morrow dropped her open handbag to the floor, half spilling the contents, knowing that Simmons would disapprove. Be theft aware. And stepped over to a map of the local area on the wall. "So, we're looking for this missing woman?" She handed over the photo of Roxana at the Botanics. "The last time her phone was picked up, it was on this hill, by Lurbrack's farm. A silver Ford Fiesta was spotted nearby." She pointed to the map. "The chief's office are involved and we need a bit of background on this area. Do you know a man called Frank Delahunt?" Simmons gave a slow blink at the map. "The chief?" Morrow didn't have time for this. The Chief of Police Scotland was now everyone's chief, but old habits of divisions and factions and geographical resentments would take longer to shuck. No one was happy, no one liked change. Some good people got their books, some bad people got promoted, and everyone blamed the chief, especially people who had never met him. Morrow leaned forward aggressively. "Can we get on with this?" Simmons was a big fish here and annoyed at being stood up to. She sat back, defensive. Police Glasgow, they call it.
Aye, well, I just call it my work, Simmons, and I'm at it now. Can we get a move on?
Simmons sat down and Morrow caught a waft of smell, a sour something, coming from a white mark on the side of her skirt. Simmons smelled it too and covered the mark with her hand. Her face hardened. Chief's an arsehole.
Morrow was genuinely shocked. Whoa! Mind your fucking language there.
Simmons was surprised at the challenge. Well, it's what we're all thinking, isn't it?
It's not what I'm thinking.
Have you met him?
Yes.
And you didn't think he was an arsehole?
I've just met you, and I think you're a fucking arsehole. They stared at each other.
Intermittently, officers were sent on training courses about particular topics. Often they would be shown videos of actors and scenarios illustrating how not to do things. Morrow was very much aware that if this was a training video about establishing interdepartmental cooperation, she was the bad officer. Having run up a steep hill and taken the moral high ground, she'd then thrown herself off, face first. Looking into Simmons' eyes, as she was now, she could see the woman formulating ways to fill out the complaint form.
I'm sorry for saying that.
A tiny movement on Simmons' lap caught her eye. She was tapping the tip of her forefinger on her knee, a slow, rhythmical tap. Morrow smiled inadvertently. Finger taps to distance the anger from the heart. It was an exercise from an anger management course officers were sent on if they'd had a certain type of incident. "What's so fucking funny?" demanded Simmons.
Morrow nodded at her hand. Mindfulness at work. Does it help?
Simmons looked accusingly at her now still hand. Sometimes. How do you know about it?
Been sent on that course twice.
Simmons looked at Morrow's hand. You don't do the finger taps?
No. It makes me angry. I'm sorry. I have an anger problem. It is my problem,
not yours, and I apologise for my behaviour towards you. Simmons finished the anger management course mantra for her. They both relaxed. Simmons gestured to the sour-smelling stain on her skirt. My mother.
Not well.
Simmons half shrugged.
I've got twins, confessed Morrow. 13 months.
Simmons looked her over for signs and couldn't see any.
Morrow slipped her coat off her shoulders and turned to show a slash mark of milky vomit down her shoulder.
Simmons smiled and softened. What do you need here?
Morrow pointed at the map. What information do you have about that area?
Nothing.
It's not known locally as Halliday's Field?
Not as far as I know.
And you've been here how long?
8 years. What else do you want?
A lawyer called Delahunt.
Simmons rolled her head away. Frank Delahunt, lawyer, retired from practice. Old Town money. He's a front for the criminal element out here. Sets up phony companies and winds them up.
Winds them up?
You know, to muddy where the money's coming from.
I see.
Morrow made a note to check Delahunt's MO later.
And who is the criminal element out here?
Mark Barrett. Used to be an upholsterer. Suddenly he's mega money, but he's quiet. It's as much as you can ask, isn't it?
Morrow thought about Danny for the first time in hours.
She realised that he might have died in the interim and felt a spark of hope. She hated herself for it.
How does Barrett keep it quiet?
He makes it pay for everyone. No real trouble. If anything's kicking off, he goes away.
Oh. Something had occurred to her. What?
Barrett's away just now.
So his mob could be involved?
Could be.
Morrow pointed to the map again. She's from Madrid.
lives in London, and she's suspected of cocaine importation from Barcelona. That's... Simmons held a hand up and nodded. Barrett. That's the connection. He's over there all the time, lots of money. We know it's coming from him, but we can't prove anything yet. OK. Might be how they know each other. She moves up here and seems to know this field as Halliday's Field, but no one else has heard of it. What about the Ford Fiesta? Simmons looked sceptical. Silver? No reg number? No, I know, said Morrow hopelessly. There's a million of them. Keep an eye out anyway. Simmons' phone rang and she looked at Morrow before picking it up. She said hello, listened, nodded, and paled. She said she'd be there in 20 minutes, and hung up. D.I. Morrow. She stood up and spoke formally as if she was giving a report. We have a female body coming out of Loch Lomond. She's not been in there for long. Chapter 19. Ian walked along the street, keeping close to the back wall of the houses, his face down. His chest felt heavy. He was breathing as if he had stones in there. He could almost hear his ribs straining apart to inflate his lungs. A car drove past him slowly, a 4x4, black, old and boxy. He scratched his forehead, covering his face. Mark didn't like them coming to the house, but Ian had no option. He saw Mark's gate up ahead. High steel gates with a door cut in one. Ian knew he was being watched. 2 bulbous cameras were placed high on the garden walls, each giving a 180-degree view of the street. He'd been inside a couple of times and Mark made a deal of showing how impenetrable the house was. Ian thought Mark probably showed the camera room and security sensors to everyone so they'd tell each other and word would get about. As he approached the gates, the inset door sagged on its hinges. He pushed it open and stepped through. A bricked forecourt with a triple garage to the left, small outbuildings to the right. One of the buildings was full of weightlifting equipment. Mark didn't lift weights. Maybe he had meant to when he had the room designed and built. Ian didn't know, but he liked to show the guys the room and the ensuite sauna. It was a big sauna for 8 people. Mark had it built, but he never seemed to have used it. The bench still looked a bit skelfy. Wee Paul stepped out of the faraway outhouse. "What are you doing here?" His voice was comically high, but no one laughed about it because he was a good guy and reportedly quite handy. Ian had never seen him hit anyone, but that was his rep. Ian walked over and glanced at Paul's yes wristband. "What are you doing wearing that?" Paul shrugged and smiled. "No here, is he?" They went back in. It was a small room, freshly plastered and floored, but bare. The only things in it were a chair and a table with a large computer monitor on it, showing feeds from all the cameras around the property. A separate monitor showed the sensor net as an abstract of red lines, all unbroken. It was very cold. The walls on these old buildings could be a foot thick. Cold seeped in through the plasterboard and varnished black floor tiles. Paul shut the door firmly and turned to look at Ian. He nodded at Ian's chest, asking if he had a microphone on him. Reluctant and annoyed, Ian took his jumper and t-shirt off, dropped them on the table, and undid his belt and zip, letting his jeans slide to his ankles. He held his hands up so Paul could give him a good look over. "Mobile?" "Left it at home." Paul looked at him, sceptical. There was something a bit gay about standing there in his Ys while Paul examined him. Maybe it was because the room was small and they were quite close together. Maybe it was that wee Paul only came to Ian's nipples, or that they were alone. but it felt a bit gay, and they were both glad when it was over. Paul gave him the nod, and Ian pulled his trousers up. He picked his t-shirt and jumper up and put them back on, enjoying the residual warmth clinging to his clothes. "So?" said Paul. Ian pinched his nose.
"Sorted that thing out."
"We know," said Paul. "You don't need to come here and tell me that."
"Listen," said Ian. "I sorted that thing out." He thumbed to the house. "Said Murray Ree's clear if I did. And I did."
Paul, assuming they were being taped by someone somewhere, held his hands out and shrugged, humming a prompt at him to continue.
"Murray met a friend of ours yesterday. He's concerned, but it's clear."
Paul nodded at the floor. He nodded at the screen. He looked at Ian. "We'll sort this out." And he thumbed at the house, meaning when Mark gets back. Sort it out meant Mark would have to intervene. Sort it out meant it wasn't yet decided whether Murray was in the clear.
Tea.
Ian looked paranoiacally around the room. He shouldn't have said that, and Paul eyed him a warning. Ian nodded. He knew he'd broken a rule. He held his hands out in front of him as if measuring a yard of Tommy.
"Was outside the sailors."
Paul pretended not to understand the significance of that. "It's a wee town. People go places."
"Deliberate."
Ian was getting desperate. Paul shrugged. Well, he wasn't going to discuss it anymore. Ian knew he could see how desperate he was, how tired and fucked up he was. Paul nearly smiled, and that sealed it. In defiance of the unseen audience, Ian grabbed the neck of Paul's hoodie, twisting it into a knot to get traction, and pulled him onto his tiptoes so that his ear was touching Ian's lips.
"I cleared it. I did it and cleared it."
And then he let go, slowly lowering wee Paul back to his feet. Now wee Paul relished being a hard man. In truth, he had nothing else going for him. He didn't have Ian's looks, or Tommy's brains, or Mark's skills in upholstery. He was small and his voice was high, and he wasn't even good at football or snooker. He had nothing to give him status but his status, so the slight of being picked up by a big scary man stung in a way it wouldn't have hurt a bigger man, and this made him reckless. He raised himself to his tiptoes, aware of the diminishing nature of the stance, and whispered in Ian's ear. "He's saying he done the thing." He stood back down and watched Ian for a reaction. Ian shook his head.
"No."
Paul raised his arms and tipped his head to the side. It was out of his hands. They'd just have to wait until Mark got back and sorted it all out.
"No,"
insisted Ian. Paul shrugged again, hands out, asking Ian what he expected him to do about it. One man's word against the other. Who the fuck knew? Ian pointed to an empty bit of floor, indicating a third party.
"Lying."
He touched his chest.
"It's clear."
He made a fist and showed the flat knuckles on the outside to wee Paul.
"Anything happens before..."
Wee Paul looked at the wall of knuckles and Ian could see he was scared. Paul looked at Ian and nodded.
"Sort it out."
Paul thumbed the house. They'd sort it out when Mark got back. "Day after tomorrow."
7:15.
"Course. Only one flight a day. Still going tonight?"
"Going where?"
"Dinner dance. Vicky Hall's." Mark had ordered them to go. Paul was asking Ian if he was in or out of Mark's team.
"I'm going. Of course I'm going."
"You better go home and wash. Starts in a couple of hours."
Aye.
Ian was breathing heavily again. He should say something back.
You getting?
Aye, said wee Paul. I'm getting to go. I'll see you there.
Paul, bud, I'd lose the wristband.
Paul glanced down. Everyone knows I am anyway.
Except Mark.
Paul shrugged and waved him out. Ian stepped out of the small door in the gate and walked back along the way he had come. Tommy must have met Paul, maybe in the street, more likely at the snooker queue. He must have met him and told him straight to his face that he, Tommy, did the thing. Or else he'd done it more subtly, implied it, let it be implied. Either way, it was a fucking outrage. Ian had suspected that Tommy might be a bit of a prick, but he didn't honestly think he would take credit for another man's work. It was contemptible. He'd chin him about it at the dance in front of wee Paul, and then everyone would know. Arsehole. Chapter 20. It looked like the entrance to a high-security prison in Brigadoon. The golf course gates, cast as the cross of St Andrew, were hung on sandstone gateposts topped with giant carved thistles. Next to the gate was a sentry box, small and grey, flanked by a free-standing intercom. Cameras were posted everywhere. Beyond the security measures, though, hidden from casual view, were pretty cottages, columned and cute, peeking out from behind perfectly manicured trees. The sun was going down over Loch Lomond, a soft pink light settling over snow-capped mountains. Morrow was a city child, most familiar with Scottish mountain views from toffee tins, and looking up at the hill still gave her a hankering for caramels. McGrain drew up their car behind Simmons. Simmons lowered her window, spoke into the intercom and showed it her ID. Her hand withdrew and the gates, barring their way, whirred open. Both cars drew into a straight driveway framed by big trees. A blazered usher stood at the far end, blocking the way to a car park outside a clubhouse. He flagged down Simmons' car, spoke to her, directing her away with an angry, chopping hand. The window rolled up, the car pulled to the right, and Morrow's phone rang. It was Simmons. "Follow me, it's down here." The usher glared in at Morrow and McGrain, jabbing a finger after Simmons' car. Morrow told Simmons on the phone, "This gentleman doesn't seem particularly grateful for our assistance." But Simmons blanked the collegiate undertone. "He doesn't want anyone to see us. They've had to shut the course." She hung up. She had other calls to take. An immaculate tarmac road led them past back roads. It was a world-famous golf course. Even Morrow had heard of it. There was certainly a lot of money here. The grass was of uniform height and colour. The trees pruned and symmetrical. Even the bins had manicured hedges around them. Simmons' car took a turn off to a wood. Morrow and McGrain followed it down into a clearing with 10-foot-high hills of yellow sand blocking the view of the loch side. Simmons was out of her car, standing and waiting for them. Morrow nodded to her. "What's the story?" Simmons was anxious to get home. Morrow recognised the agitated look. She gave the briefing in truncated phrases, as if that would get either of them home faster. Estate worker, out in a boat to clear crap out of the loch near the course. Saw a pair of feet stuck in a branch. Local cops went out in an RIB. Secured area. Estate worker brought back. That's his house. There. She pointed at a cottage peeking coyly out from behind a magnolia tree. Scene of crime in the Path Lab on the way from Glasgow. How long ago did the estate worker call it in? Simmons checked her watch. About an hour. He's in shock. He tried to hook it thinking it was a shop dummy. The head's badly damaged. Cop said face is over here. She slid her hand down over one shoulder and then, as if shocked by the thought, turned and walked away. Morrow followed her through a well-trodden, zigzagging path between the sand dunes until they came to a small dock. It seemed little used. "What's all the sand for?" she asked. "Bunkers on the golf course. And the grey stuff behind it's for building works. They're always building crap for the tourists out here. Heard now they're doing some black houses with steam showers and jacuzzis. Black houses are what they used to keep pigs in." Simmons pointed to the far end of the dock. "That's his boat there." An old boat bobbed on the water. A small crane gibbeting hung off the back. A metal crab claw hanging on a chain. The wheelhouse was as narrow as an upright coffin. Old and worn and nifty, the CJ2 looked like the inspiration for a kid's cartoon. A grey police rigid inflatable boat was docked behind it, ready to take Morrow and Simmons out. An officer on the dock handed each of them an orange life jacket. Morrow copied Simmons, slipping it on, doing the clips and mirroring her moves as they stepped into the boat. They sat down next to each other on the bench at the back, the two officers standing up front to counterbalance their weight. The boat took off out of the dock, skimming gently into the middle of Loch Lomond before taking a left. Morrow had never been on a boat before. She'd been on a ferry, but never a proper on-the-water boat. The RIB took the middle lane, moving at a regal pace, making its way slowly up the loch to minimise any wash from the engine. They wouldn't want to dislodge any evidence around the body. Mountains in the distance were shrouded in the dusk, receding and misty, flats on a theatre set. Passing a cluster of small islands near the shore, each of an almost magical roundness, they reached the open loch and a wide expanse of water. As they pulled gently to the left, the boat tipped slightly, and Morrow steadied herself, laying a hand on the side, a queen taking a solid rubberised courtier's arm. It was so pretty and Victorian she could almost hear a faint crinoline crinkle hanging in the air. They slowed as they turned at a small island. Through trees she saw a dirty feathered swan settled on its nest. The waterline was a black rim built of peat bricks. Surprised, she realised that the island was a landscaped feature.
"Is that not a real island?"
she asked Simmons. "Nothing out here is real," Simmons said. "There's too much money out here for any of it to be left real." Slowly circumventing the island, Morrow saw what it had been built to shield. Loch Lomond Golf Course was laid out ahead of them on a long, immaculate peninsula. Acres of perfectly undulating green velvet, pockmarked with yellow sandy craters. The trees by the water were pollarded to uniform height. The RIB engine was switched off and they floated towards the tree-lined shore on its waning momentum. The RIB officers used their paddles, turning the boat side on to the shore. Simmons stood, a hand on Morrow's shoulders to indicate that she should stay down. They both looked over to the base of the trees. The dead woman was almost completely obscured, tangled in an underwater root system, the underground branches creeping out into the clear, cold water. She was on her back, arms out, legs splayed, in a relaxed pose, as if she was in a hot bath. Blunt trauma to the head. Her face had slipped sideways, but the water allowed the viewer to believe the distortion was refracted light. No blood in the water. It could have been washed away, but she'd probably been killed elsewhere, which was annoying. It meant they had no scene of crime to examine, which meant they had a lot less to go on.
End of CD 4. CD 5.
Simmons' hand was shaking. Her knee buckled slightly, and she sat down next to Morrow to disguise her distress. She clasped her hands together and turned her face so that no one would see how hard she found it to look. Morrow liked her for that. Visceral compassion was rare at their level. Morrow took a turn at standing. The dead woman was chubby. She had mum jeans on. Her feet were bare, but Morrow saw the seams of tights over her toes. A white cotton t-shirt had turned grey and transparent in the water. Underneath, she wore a heavy-duty white bra with industrial straps. Too short, too dumpy. It wasn't Roxana.
Not mine, she said.
Simmons touched her on the back, telling her to sit down then and let her get back up. But just then the tail of the boat slipped past the body. It was peeking out of the front pocket of the jeans. A ribbon loop, yellow with red writing on it.
No, said Morrow, shoving Simmons' insistent hand away. She told the RIB officers, bring me back around.
The officers paddled conservatively, holding the flat of the paddle so that the water moved around them. The boat bobbed a full circle. The ribbon in her pocket was a lanyard, worn around the neck to hold an ID badge. A yellow ribbon with tiny red ladders printed on it. Injury claims for you.
Is it her?
Asked Simmons at her hip.
No, said Morrow, but I think it's connected.
She nodded to the RIB operator.
Could you see when she went in?
It depends how long she's been in there. Morrow looked at the colour of her skin. She wasn't even bloated yet and her knees were articulated.
Say not much more than a day?
He looked back at the body, at the tangle of roots under the water. He turned and looked out onto the water.
Well, it's a quiet day, not much wash coming in from vessels. And I guess,
he pointed out to the flat plain of water,
I'd say just there. Not far then.
Yeah, he said. Really not far. Different if it was a weekend or the ferry was out. The water would be moving a lot more. It's very deep in parts, but not until you get right out over there. He pointed across to the distant mountains. Not around here. Whoever had done it had left her in just the wrong place. It looked more like a mistake than an attempt at displaying a body. It was a pretty obscure place. She asked, "Who did you say found her in here?" "Estate worker." Simmons sat back down and dropped her voice. "He's just done a sentence."
"What for?"
"Possession. Still on parole. But he's a nice man. His mother's well known and liked in the town. She's on the Flower Festival committee. Lady Cole." Morrow suspected that nice man was Helensburgh shorthand for middle class. The RIB retraced its path, moving again with excruciating slowness. They turned the corner around the Swan's nesting island and gathered a little more speed, approaching the dock they had come from. One of the RIB officers was waiting in a clearing of trees with the estate worker who had found the body. The worker was about 40, wearing a red baseball cap, rubberised yellow dungarees and a green knitted jumper. McGrain was standing at the other end of the dock, by the sand dunes, watching for her.
"Ma'am,"
he shouted, pointing further up the dock to the sand dunes.
"Found the scene."
"Thank fuck for that," muttered Morrow. "Simmons, can you wait here and direct the forensic and pathology people? I want to talk to the estate guy." "Of course."
"And get photos of everything."
The boat drew up and Morrow stepped out fluently, unclipping her life jacket and chucking it back in the boat. She waved to McGrain to join her. Andrew Cole, estate worker, was devastated. Shock manifested in odd ways, and Morrow noted him looking at her with glazed, languid eyes. He raised a hand to scratch his cheek, moving with the tantric slowness of a man who cannot assimilate what he has just seen. "Mr. Cole," said Morrow gently as she approached, "can we go to your house? I'd like to ask you some questions." "Sure," he whispered, looking at his feet, his eyes obscured by the peak of his cap. "Yeah." Morrow and Magrain walked him carefully along the dock to his house around the corner. He walked slowly, dragging his feet, his shoulders slumped. Around a tree they came to a tiny Georgian villa, painted yellow, the door framed by stumpy Doric columns and a low, overhanging roof. He reached deep into the dungarees, to the pocket of the trousers he was wearing underneath, and took out a lone key to unlock it. It seemed odd to Morrow that he would lock his front door, but she didn't know the area. Cole shuffled down a low hallway to the living room, fell into the only armchair and lit a cigarette. Without looking for it, he reached for an empty ashtray on the fireplace and sat it in his lap. He inhaled deeply, blowing the smoke out through his nose.
"Choking for a smoke?"
asked Magrain. Cole started slightly, as though he'd forgotten they were there. "Oh," he spoke softly, "can't smoke on the grounds. Sacking offence." "How long have you lived here, Mr. Cole?" He blinked several times before answering. 5 months. "Is the cottage a perk of your job, or do you own it?" With the job." He took his hat off, the rim of it scorched red on his forehead, and ran his fingers through his thinning ginger hair. He set the hat on his knee and drew on his cigarette again. Even from the little he had said so far, Morrow could tell that Mr. Cole, the estate worker, was much, much posher than she was. He smoked in silence for a moment, and she let him, looking around at the small room. It was long-term messy. He hadn't brought much with him by way of furniture: 1 armchair, a telly, a side table and ashtrays. She could read Mr. Cole's route through his day from the room. A half-drunk mug of milky tea was on the floor by his chair, a creamy cloud coagulating on the surface. It had been there for a while. Also on the floor were 2 plates, stacked on top of each other, separated by a half-slice of toast on the bottom. The top plate had a single bite of coleslaw sandwich left on it. The mayo was still opaque, and the house was warm. Morrow guessed it had been there since lunchtime. The armchair seemed to be the centre of operations for Mr. Cole. His laptop, clunky and inexpensive, within reach on the floor. The chair itself faced a small supermarket flat-screen television. From these facts, D.I. Morrow deduced that Mr. Cole was a single gentleman. He seemed to spend his leisure time sitting in his chair, watching telly, smoking and eating not for pleasure but to appease his hunger. A normal day, until he went out onto the water and found a dead woman.
"Did you phone from the boat, Mr. Cole?"
"Phone?"
"Call us when you found the woman."
"In boat? I work for the course." He pointed vaguely up the shore. "Cold." He wasn't making any sense. He blinked hard at the floor, and she thought suddenly, heavy smoker, bad diet, terrible shock. He could be having a stroke. Her mind sped up. Young man, but it might be congenital. She ran through the diagnostic checklist. Facial drooping? None. Clawed hand? None. Rubbing painful shoulder? Cole gave a great sigh and bent forwards over his knees, a potential sign of pain. Morrow's hand was on her phone in her pocket, thinking ambulance. But he sat up straight, shut his eyes and took another languorous draw on his cigarette. "Mr. Cole, are you on any medication?" He shook his head. "Statins or anything?" "No. Pills, no." He gave a puzzled smile at the wall behind her. Morrow understood suddenly. Mr. Cole had done a sentence for possession. She barked a laugh at the sudden realisation, and Migraine laughed along with her. Mr. Cole looked up at them and his face cracked into a "please like me" smile. "I thought he was having a stroke," said Morrow. But Mr. Cole was neither suffering from shock, nor was he having a stroke. It seemed that Mr. Cole had smoked an Olympic amount of marijuana this morning. Migraine stepped towards him and bent down as if he was addressing a lost child. "Mr. Cole." He smiled pleasantly. "You're still on parole, aren't you? Would we be correct in assuming that you've been smoking certain substances today?" Mr. Cole looked indignant. "What? You would say that to me?" They chuckled to each other. Aware that they were laughing at him, Mr. Cole stood up. Swaying, he held onto the fireplace to steady himself and touched his chest, inadvertently assuming the pose of a Victorian actor in a melodrama. "Officers, from my point of view, I think to say that I'm, frankly, quite hurt of the suggestion." Morrow and Migraine stood and laughed a joyous gale at him. It wasn't just the timeless joke of an inebriate in denial. It was funny because he was posh and sincere. It was sweet how sincere he was. "Let's bring him in," she told Migraine. "Speak to him later." "Never gets old, does it?" chuckled Migraine. Mr. Cole confided sadly to the carpet, "I'm very offended right now." Migraine stepped forward, took a firm hold on Cole's arm and turned him to the front door. "We're going to take you to the station, Mr. Cole. See if we can have a better chat there." "No." Cole addressed Migraine's grip on him. "That's... But I'm upset of all this laughing." "Well, that's a very great shame, sir." Mr. Cole stopped. His mood shifted, and he smiled beatifically at them both. "Do you know what? Don't worry about it." "Oh," Migraine grinned. "You're very kind." Cole asked, "Where are we going?" "We, sir, are off-ski." Migraine opened the door. "To the station, where you will be held pending a 5-minute interval when you're no longer off your tits." They left, and Morrow found herself on her own in the room. Cole wasn't allowed to smoke in the grounds. He must have smoked the hash before he went out. She looked at the floor and realised that there was no hash lying around. There were no pipes or torn papers on the floor, no papers at all, no roaches in the ashtray. The detritus of his wasted day was lying around the room, but before he went out on the boat, Mr. Cole had the foresight to hide the evidence of a parole violation. Silly, sweet, harmless Mr. Cole had known that the police were coming. Chapter 21. All of the tables in the Paddle Cafe were arranged into 3 stations: starters, desserts, and 2 types of mains. Small plates of cold poached salmon were laid out on big catering trays and overlaid with tinfoil. Dessert was lemon tart, the mains a choice of chicken or quiche. All there was to do when they got there was add whichever fresh element the plates needed: warm toast, creme fraiche, and bang it out the door. For Boyd, it was an unforeseen but tremendously pleasing aspect of charity catering.
He didn't feel obliged to give anyone a choice about anything. Eat it or leave it. He got Helen, the youngest waitress, to lift the tinfoil lids from the trays while he added a garnishing sprig of dill to the poached pink strip on each plate. Helen had failed her exams. He remembered that much about her. Missed out on uni this year, was attending a crammer to get her grades up. She laid the tinfoil back down like a stage assistant covering a watch, smiling as Boyd played the part of the magician. Now you see it, now you don't. Helen was quite attractive, slim and dark with big eyes, but she had a confident look about her. She looked as if she'd gossip if you asked her where to buy Coke. He could see another girl in the kitchen, Katie, decanting tubs of creme fraiche into enormous earthenware jugs. Katie was mousy, though. She wouldn't know. He should just wait and see Tommy Farmer. Since it was a blowout night, Boyd allowed himself the luxury of a little sexual speculation about the two girls and fixed on Helen. Helen shy, Helen naked, Helen bending over a bed. "What can I do for you?" Miss Grierson slid into his line of vision, expressionless. She was talking about the catering job, but the overlap of thoughts made him uneasy. "Right." Boyd raised his voice so everyone could hear him. "Susan will organise a trail of people to carry the starters to the hall. We'll need tray carriers and a couple of escorts in case they lose their grip or the tinfoil comes off while they're walking." Miss Grierson gave a curt little nod and went into the kitchen. A moment later she was out again, had all the girls with her, even the lazy part-timer Simone, who would hide out by the bins when it got busy. They each took a tray from Miss Grierson and Helen. Grierson held the door open. Helen followed at the rear, and they stepped out into the soft evening air with poached salmon for 100 people. Boyd watched the single file pass the window in neat procession. She was good, Miss Grierson, able. He felt quite calm about the challenge of the night. They only had to go 2 blocks uphill to the Victoria Halls. Boyd stepped out of the door, watching them go. His congregation walked, heads up, arms laden towards the promise of a public obligation honourably fulfilled. Boyd felt the rightness of the thing, the timelessness of it. In this ordered place, this event must occur. Tommy was puttering about the living room, pocketing fags and bits of change into his dress jacket. Elaine hurried in with a cup of tea and a packet of biscuits. She set them on a side table, put the telly on to Cowboy Builders, and jumped into the recliner. Using the armrests to lift her weight off the chair, she pushed the footrest out and settled in for the night. Tommy watched as she pulled her lap blanket over her knees, checked her tea and biscuits were within reach, that she had the remote, a pilot conducting final safety checks. "You'll be late if you don't go now. And mind you tell them it was me sold the raffle tickets." I'll tell them. He was too adamant. Elaine gave him a look. Tommy smiled. "OK, I will tell them." "Aye." She went back to watching telly. "I'll be checking on that, son." Smirking because he'd been caught out, Tommy went out to the hall to see himself in the mirror. He kept his eyes to the details. Polo shirt collar straight, hair flat. He avoided looking himself in the eye. He opened the front door. "Bye, Lainey." And he stepped out into the stone close. Lainey sing-songed, "Bye-ya," after him, and he shut the door. Damp cold clung to the walls. Tommy checked for passing neighbours back and front. No one. He walked up to the closed door and shut it loudly, making a soundscape for Lainey. He opened it again, silently, and slipped out to the street, jamming the door with a bit of brick.
Then he tucked his hands into his pockets and, head up, face forward, walked past the living room window, letting Lainey witness him go. Past the window he ducked and doubled back to the close, staying under the sill. He towed the brick out of the way and snuck through the door to the back court. The grass was thin and the ground uneven, but he stayed off the well-lit path to the bin sheds. The fence was made of chicken wire, peeled back into the muddy back lane. He sidled through, careful not to catch his good trousers on the ragged wires, and made his way down to the dark end of the road and the abandoned lockups. The second-to-last garage had a flip-up door, peeling red paint. No one used the lockups now, not since one of them fell in, but Tommy occasionally parked things in this garage. He knew they were safe. The door didn't open beyond knee-height. He bent down now and lifted the door, crouching to feel into the dark, fingers wiggling until he found the soft plastic handle. He pulled the petrol can out and stood up, thinking his way through the job. He cautioned himself not to get any on his clothes. It smelled distinctive and he'd be flammable if he did. Also, fumes could stick on your clothes if you've poured it in a confined space. So just use the spout, pour it through a window, leave the jacket nearby, roll the sleeves up. Stay out of the fumes. Keep the wind at your back. He was concerned that the fire would be spotted before it got going and look petty, not serious. It needed to be the right window to go well. He couldn't turn up at the dinner with mud on his good shoes, so rather than heading down the dirt lane to the street, he slid back through the hole in the fence and cut across the back court again. In his head he was already at the Sailors, with the wind at his back and his jacket rolled up, already striking the match, so he didn't see Elaine until it was too late. She was at the kitchen sink, looking out of the window straight at him. Tommy stopped in the pool of light from their kitchen. For a startling moment their eyes met. Elaine caught herself before he did, looking down quickly into the sink. She pretended that she hadn't seen him, but she'd looked straight at him, standing in the back court in his smart jacket, holding a red can of petrol. She blushed with the effort of evasion. Lies weren't Lainey's style. Lies were Tommy's style, but not with his mum. Embarrassed, he kept his head down and walked out through the close to the street. The bright white overhead lights in the Victoria halls had to be left on for safety reasons. It was a very old building and the softer side lights hadn't been safety checked recently. It didn't matter how nicely the tables were dressed or how the food looked in the back room. It didn't matter how much dill or cress or how artfully arranged a drizzle of jus was. It looked like the canteen deck on a ferry. The big hall was vaulted, the high ceiling painted peach with a white trim. For reasons, possibly Victorian authenticity, possibly an aesthetic oversight, the vibrant peach had been twinned with mint green and pink walls. Long burgundy curtains were draped on the stage and windows. Ropes of red balloons hung around the balcony. Tickets had sold very well, and tables jostled around the perimeter of the dance floor. The top table sat up on the stage, a Last Supperish affair of local nabobs and charity officials sitting in a row, chewing bread rolls as though they were setting an example for the lower orders on the floor. The charity had contributed 2 big posters to flank the top table. A big-eyed girl with a shaved head and a nasal feeding tube taped to her cheek smiled wanly twice and watched the assembly eat. Every demographic of the town was represented, the rich and old, the poor and almost young, all joined together to raise money for a worthy cause. Some of the women were more used to nightclubs than dinner dances, and were fake-tanned orange and tottering about in platform high heels and mini-dresses. The sedate, older women of the town, more familiar with the conventions of the dinner dance, had their hair set and were dressed in long skirts and heels they could dance in. Men wore sports jackets and slacks, or else kilts, which were expensive and bought for significant weddings, and they were damn well going to get the wear out of them. The starters had gone down well, though most of the fresh dill returned on the plates. Boyd was watching through the side door for the last empties and bread baskets to come back. The staff gradually assembled in the side room, ready to begin serving the main meal. He turned to Miss Grierson. "How long since the top table starters came back?" She checked her clipboard and watch. 11 minutes. He nodded, watching the last set of plates weaving their way back through the hall. 4 minutes and they would be late. Looking over the bald and grey heads in the hall, Boyd knew that most of them had children, and most of the children would get married. The Victoria Halls was a prime wedding venue. When the day was chosen and the dinner was being booked, these people would think of him. This was his chance to glean a lot of custom. All he had to do was serve good-sized portions of decent food at reasonable intervals. Boyd ducked into the side room where the plates were laid out. From a bain-marie plugged into the wall, he spooned mash and chicken onto 5 plates. One top tabler had requested quiche. He sent the girls out. For the next 25 minutes he spooned and served, looking hard at each plate to check for imperfections, envisioning the fresh eyes of diners landing on the food for the first time. He lost himself in the meditative task, enjoying the rolling rhythm of spoon to spoon as he shaped the mash, drizzled gravy over chicken. His face was damp, whether with sweat or the condensation of the bain-marie he didn't know, but he dabbed it with the tea towel at his apron and carried on. In the background he heard Miss Grierson call the tables. 2 quiche on 16, 1 chicken no mash on 18. Interchangeable girls in black aprons gliding in and out of the room with arms empty, arms full, never stopping to drink or talk. Boyd had run out of plates to fill. He looked up. "Service done," said Miss Grierson. Boyd nodded to the hall. "Can you check?" She went off to look through the door, leaving Boyd alone in the carpeted side room. He had 8 chicken portions left over, and a full 12-portion organic quiche. He could sell it in the cafe tomorrow. Miss Grierson came back, smiling. "Service done." "Going down well?" "Come and see." Dabbing his damp face, he stepped out to look through the glass doors. 100 heads were bent over plates, the room full of the discordant jangle of cutlery hitting crockery. The waitresses were all locals, and had stayed in the hall, chatting to diners they knew. The top table were eating, talking, looking at their plates as if they might be saying something complimentary about the food. Everyone was happy, and Boyd was pleased. He spotted Tommy Farmer sitting at a table near the stage, smiling, leaning low over his plate to scoop mash into his mouth. His jacket was on the back of his chair, and Boyd's heart swelled, as if he'd spotted a girl he had a crush on. "That's gone really well," he said. "Yeah," said Miss Grierson. Could he just go over and talk to Tommy? A hand on the back of his chair, a whisper in his ear. "All right, Tommy? Just wondered." But he was a bit sweaty and everyone was still sitting down. He'd be obvious. Wait until after the puddings. Boyd meant to air-pat Miss Grierson's back in a congratulatory way, but his eyes were on Tommy, and he didn't notice when she stepped back into his cupped hand. Boyd's palm landed on her waist, just too low. He was touching her buttocks. Miss Grierson looked at him, eyebrows high with surprise. Reeling away, Boyd scurried off to the back room. He was cringing, half laughing with embarrassment. He glanced back, hoping to find her embarrassed and laughing too. She wasn't. Miss Grierson was looking at him expressionless, but the steadiness of her stare said yes. Ian was at a corner table in the hall, in the shadow of the balcony, having been swept there on a wave as they were let into the room. He didn't see anyone he knew very well while he was waiting, ticket in hand, at the doors. Murray was late. Wee Paul and the other guys were yet in the pub, and Tommy didn't seem to be there either. He wanted to talk to Tommy, preferably in front of Wee Paul, but he'd have to wait. He ended up sitting next to a couple he knew from years ago. They'd brought a gangly nephew with them. The boys stared at the table throughout and finished everyone else's food. Ian sat quietly and let them talk among themselves. People came to the table and left, hands on Ian's shoulders, hands gone. Ian ate, savouring the hot food, realising he hadn't eaten for 24 hours, and that was partly why he felt so bad. The night fizzed around him. It peaked, it troughed. Then he spotted Tommy sitting across the room, near the stage, but they were eating their mains by then, and Ian would have drawn every eye if he walked over to him. He thought he saw the back of Murray heading out to the toilet, but wasn't sure. He saw Granny Eunice, and she gave him a wee wave. She had her leg up on a chair and gave him an exaggerated wince across the room to show him it was still sore. Susan Grierson came in during the puddings, dressed formally in black clothes, holding a clipboard as if she was working with the caterers but not carrying plates. She walked over to speak to a waitress and passed quite close by, but pointedly ignored him. He was pleased about that. A man from the charity came around as the puddings were being finished, thanking them for coming, mentioning the sick kiddies, talking about dying and how that was a shame. Full of food, Ian felt very calm and tired. It had been a busy few days. All he had left to do was chin Tommy about taking credit for the lassie, and he could go home and sleep. That was all he wanted in the world right now, to sleep, face down, unmoving, and wake up tomorrow morning aching and groggy. He sat back with his hand on his stomach, looking around the hall. Smokers were getting up and moving to the exit. Tommy was over by the doors, texting and laughing at a joke Hank Murphy was busy telling. Ian might as well go and speak to him now. Boyd had been cowering in the service room. Miss Grierson slid into the doorway and smiled softly. "Okay, Boyd."
Yep."
He picked up a spoon and wiped creme fraiche off it nervously. Miss Grierson stayed there, staring at him, until the girls started coming back in with the pudding plates. Boyd busied himself, helping Helen to stack up the final load of plates from the mains. A few pernickety diners had eaten around the chicken or the mash or the salad, mostly the salad. It had flowers in it. Wrong crowd. Boyd kept his head down as all the plates came back. He and Helen and Kate took the final load of plates out of the side door and put them on a metal catering trolley that was already half full. "Take it back to the cafe," he told them. "Leave it in the kitchen and get your coats and bags and go home." They could do the washing up in the morning. They were getting time and a half for the evening. He didn't want the shift to go later than it needed to. He watched them trundle the heavy trolley off into the street and went back to look into the hall again. Coffee making had been delegated to the people who ran the hall, but Boyd had sent the girls out with a small plate of chocolates for each table, a Compliments of the Paddle Cafe card set prominently in the middle. Miss Grierson took the last few out herself. Hungry for a sight of Tommy, Boyd dropped his tea towel and went to the hall doors, peering through the bevelled glass. The tables were breaking up. They'd have a smoking break before the charity auction, and then the dancing would begin. He saw Miss Grierson in the hall, mingling, asking people if they enjoyed their meal and being reintroduced to a lot of the upper-middle-class diners who might remember her. She stood by comfortably, hands clutched in front of her, allowing herself to be explained. An occasional flash of sadness in her eyes, probably when her mother's death came up. Then a gracious smile and a promise to meet up again soon, have a good night, enjoy the dancing. She slid between tables, her pleasant smile unwavering. She wasn't actually old, he realised. She could only be 50, early 50s. He supposed her old because she was older than him when it mattered. Maybe it didn't really matter anymore. Suddenly tired, Boyd took a deep breath, tilting his head back and looking down a cheek at the hall. His half-shut eyes turned the people into a blur, melting them into a solid mass of hairspray and jackets. Smokers were coming to the door, bringing hats and bags, gleeful at being free to go outside. Tommy Farmer was standing by his seat, pulling his jacket on, about to leave, and Boyd thought he could go in and approach him now. He opened the door just as a fat man in full kilt outfit came through the door. "Ah!" He threw his arms out and grabbed Boyd. "Brilliant!" He was sweating wildly. "Fantastic food, Boyd!" Tommy drifted past them as the man dragged Boyd into the hall. Everyone turned to look at him. A smattering of applause rolled round the room. Not quite enough, in Boyd's opinion, but a round of applause nonetheless. They'd thank him during the speeches. Maybe people were saving their appreciation for later. There he was in the hall, out on the choppy waters of society, bobbing from table to table. Hands reached for him, congregation members and customers. He found himself sucked into eddies of conversation, compliments and introductions. Now he was under the balcony being introduced to a small, purple-faced pensioner who knew his father. The plum-faced man talked angrily about the Reverend Robert having died, how the church had gone downhill since, as though the death had been directed at him. His flustered wife took over the conversation. She was at school with someone who knew his mother, but they had died and that was a mercy, and wasn't Boyd doing well? So nice he was back home. And how many children? 2 boys? Well, that must be a handful. Miss Grierson was suddenly behind him. She didn't wait for a break in the pensioner's ramble, but whispered in his ear, "I've got some white." She said it very casually, as if she was warning him about a gravy spill. Boyd stood as still as if she had goosed him back. He nodded at the old woman in front of him. Someone's daughter had an illness of some kind, but she didn't let that hold her back. Miss Grierson murmured to him, her lips brushing his earlobe, "Give me the cafe keys and wait 5 minutes." Without breaking eye contact with the lady telling the story, Boyd took his keys out of his pocket and handed them to her. From the corner of his eye, he saw Miss Grierson coursing to the doors, tacking between tables and squally groups of people. Elated, he looked around for someone to waste the 5 minutes on. With misplaced delight, he smiled at an old woman sitting nearby. She gave him a pained smile, her hand rubbing circles on her swollen knee in an orthopaedic brace. "Knee's gi'en me the jip," she said, as if he had inquired. "She's to keep it up, haven't ye, pet?" Another old woman explained across the table. She was warmer, more likeable. "You the Puddle Cafe man?" "Paddle, yes." "Oh, son, your prices are criminal." Boyd was irritated by that, but he was getting a sniff in a minute, so he shouldn't really let trivial slights worry him. Let it go. You're a Fraser, aren't you?
chimed the martyr to her knee.
And tell me this,
The stupid cow called over.
isn't your family the Lawnmower Frasers?
It was the way she said it, the intonation of the odd girl he'd met on the seafront. Boyd realised that he was looking at the two grannies, and he smiled. Yeah, the Lawnmower Frasers. The two grannies nodded, once to each other, once to him, running through the family history in their minds, finding him acceptable. Are you Granny Eunice and Granny Annie?
Oh, how would you know that?
I met Leanne earlier with her dad down at the Esplanade.
Coming out of the pub, likely.
Yeah, said Boyd, coming out of the pub. Didn't she say one of you was babysitting tonight? The women looked at each other. The father didn't want to go out in the end, one said. He gave them the ticket, said the other, and they just came together. Boyd started to tell them how he recognised the intonation of their speech in their granddaughters, but someone who had a sister who'd just had a stroke was standing by the table, and no one was very interested in his phonetic observations. He shifted away, and the martyr called after him.
And son, listen, your gravy wants salt.
He walked away feeling belittled and imagined Sanjay laughing at him. Your gravy wants salt. Tommy Farmer crossed his path and glanced at him, but Boyd didn't give a fuck about him now. He walked straight out of the halls and down to the cafe. Ian watched Tommy cross to the door and thought quite suddenly that it might be nice to get a breath of air himself. He stood up, lifting his jacket off the back of the chair, and smiled suddenly. Fresh air indeed. An addict's lie. He was going to beg a smoke off someone. And then he was outside with a gaggle of smokers lined up along the disabled ramp. Everyone was there. All the good-looking women and guys, younger than him, most of them, but good guys. A young team were listening to Darren Oakey tell a story and snorting and laughing. Tommy took a fag out and watched Darren, a little jealous pinch between his eyebrows. Tommy couldn't tell a story. Ian walked towards him and saw Tommy's face harden. Wee Paul says you says it was you, muttered Ian. Tommy snorted. So? They squared up to each other. No fighting, though, Mark would not approve, so they looked at each other, and neither said what they were thinking. Tommy was thinking that it was him. He'd done all the organising, got the van, etc., so it was him, really. Ian was thinking that he had raised his hand over the woman. He got Andrew Cole to loan them the boat, and it was his hands that had killed her. Slowly, Tommy's eyes fell to Ian's fingertips. Your hands look fucking mental, he said. Ian looked at them. Lainey said that too, but Tommy was just distracting him. You leave off Murray Ray, Ian said, dropping his hand, or I'll fucking swing for you. They looked at each other. Tommy decided something that Ian couldn't fathom. He smirked and lit the cigarette. Ian looked at the packet. Gie us one. Tommy did. Ian still had his lighters, yellow, but that didn't bother him as much anymore. They smoked next to each other on the ramp, a peace pipe of sorts. Darren was into another story and more people came out. Some of the smoking women had men's dinner jackets draped over their shoulders for warmth. Tommy sloped off. Ian begged another fag off a woman he knew. He'd done everything he needed to do. He felt quite good. He stayed outside even when the cigarettes were done, keeping to the outskirts of the crowd, enjoying being part of it, but still separate. It got colder, darker.
The smokers pulled their jackets and coats around them, huddling together for warmth. Darren and another young guy started telling the same story. They were speaking too loud, shouting different versions of the punchlines over each other for the audience of women. The drone was so faint it felt like a memory at first, a faraway whine coming over the rooftops from the east. Fire engines. Chat around the door petered out. The night felt suddenly cold as the drone got louder. It was coming from the shore. Red lights flashing at the bottom of Sinclair Street, filling Boots the chemist's window with a bloody, molten smear. Sirens cut dead in mid-wail. The crowd drifted out to the street, watching down to the water. A black cloud of smoke billowed taller than the town, rolling in like a monster stepping out of the sea. A voice in the crowd. "Oh, Christ! It's the sailors!" A woman called to the doors, "Somebody! Get Murray out here!" And people in the hall took up the cry, "Murray's place is on fire! Get Murray out here!" But Murray wasn't in the hall. Hardly breathing, Ian watched as Eunice and Annie came to the door. They stood, backlit. They held each other, watching down to the water, as stone-faced as fishermen's wives in a storm. Ian froze. They were both there. Murray wasn't there, and Leanne was never left alone. Ian was next to them, looming over them, breathless with terror, and the little women didn't need to speak or tell him. They turned their horrified faces to the fire. "Where are they?" shouted Ian, but he knew where they'd be. "You need to tell! You need to phone!" But they didn't have phones with them. From the corner of his eye, he saw a bright rectangle of light, someone taking a picture of the fire. He grabbed it, shoved the indignant photographer away and held it out to Annie. "Emergency! Say they're in there!" Annie fumbled the phone to Eunice, and she stabbed at it 3 times. Glass exploded somewhere far away. The high snap carried on the wind. Ian saw red flames lick above the rooftops, stark against the black water. Thick black smoke curled up taller than the town, billowing in from the west. The smoke was Mark's proxy. The town cleaved to his will, and Ian watched it coil around the buildings on the seafront. He was moving, heart hammering, not certain he was moving because everyone around him was moving too, inexorable as a mudslide, downhill, into the fire. A gust of wind from the water blew the thick smoke up the valley of the street towards them. The mob recoiled, but not Ian. He walked on into the benedicting smoke. Heat and a grainy weight pressed on his chest. He hurried into it, breathing deep the suffocating black. The wind changed direction. Like a giant incense burner over the town, it swung the smoke out of the narrow street and away, up, out to sea. Ian slowed to a stagger. As sudden as the grace of faith withdrawn, he found himself alone outside the Tesco Metro. Smoke rose from his good jacket. He coughed, and his spit was black. He shuffled on to the corner, stopping when he got across the road from the burning pub. The inside of the cafe looked bigger in the dark. It looked bigger and braver, and like just the smartest thing anyone had ever done. Boyd was sweating, and as if seeing the half-lit room for the first time, he knew deep in his heart that he had done a laudable thing here. Really, when you thought about it, bringing seasonal, local, organic food to the town, genius. And he had brought it to the town, because there was nothing, literally nothing like that here before him. And they complained that his gravy wanted salt. He looked down at Miss Grierson's head, bobbing at his crotch. He'd momentarily forgotten what they were doing, But abruptly, all the sensations flooded his mind and he was lost in it. The wetness and strangeness, that it was her, that it was here, in the dark, when his eyes were burning, his nose fizzing. The blinds were drawn on the windows. Lights flashing past, white noise outside, people in groups passing. The detritus of the evening's event was stacked all around the kitchen. He didn't need to come in tomorrow. Flashes of light blossomed behind his lids as he bucked into her mouth, long-term tension pulsing out through his cock. He caught his breath and his work-obsessed mind finished the thought. He didn't need to come in tomorrow because the girls would do the washing up in the morning. Fuck. Even a blowjob from a stranger was ruined by intrusive notes about the fucking staff rota. He was wired and angry again. A waste of a crime. He looked down and saw Miss Grierson pull away. Then she did a very odd thing. It happened so quickly, just a second. Boyd instantly blinked, rerunning the action in his head, teasing the different movements apart because they didn't seem to fit together. First, she twisted away from him, turning the full 360, fishing in her mouth for something. Then she turned back to face him, and her hand was at her side, her face a picture of innocence, an air hostess smile, devoid of personal feeling, an obligation. Boyd opened his eyes. It was odd because the movement was so fluid. It seemed he couldn't think of the word for a second, but then it came to him. Professional. Time lag. Time slips. He hadn't taken cocaine for a long time, but did remember time slips. This didn't feel like that, though. Didn't have the guillotine sharpness in the middle. Miss Grierson stood up and smiled at him. A silver trail across her cheek caught the light. She had a little snowy rim on her nostril. "Let's go to my house," she whispered. "I've got plans for you." He glanced down and saw a baggy condom in her hand. She saw him looking at it. "Dental dam," she said. "HIV." It wasn't a dental dam, though. It was a female condom, sort of, but shorter, sort of. Boyd took his key out of the door shutter and stood up. Now that, just there, that was a time slip. That did feel like a cut-out bit. He couldn't work out why that mattered, really, until he turned and saw her smiling as she walked away uphill. Miss Grierson, for fuck's sake. Walking time lag. Side by side, they took the wide road diagonally, each with their hands deep in their pockets, staying wide of each other in case they were spotted. Down a back road towards her house. Why had they gone uphill, he wondered, as they walked through moon shadows from overhanging trees. Her house was downhill from the cafe. Was it a shortcut? "Did you see someone down there?" he asked. "What?" "Why are we going this way?" "Just, I like this." She drew an arc over her head. "The trees." She smiled away from him, her eyes lingering on his face. Everything felt weird now. He was cold. She was odd. Was she a prostitute? What had she done for a living in America? In London? "What did you do for a living in America?" He meant to ask her casually, but it came out like a demand for payment. "In America?" "Yeah." They walked on for a bit. "School teacher?" She sounded exclamatory herself, as if she was shouting a joke, but she wasn't smiling. "Oh." They carried on, crossing so they were walking next to a high wall into someone's garden, on the grassy verge, even though the road was empty. They were keeping in the shadows, him following her. She did not want to be seen with him. That made him feel more comfortable. She was secretive. That was good. He followed her across the road, down the side of her family grounds, through a garden gate at the side, which was fitted with a new padlock. The gate shut behind him, and Boyd found himself in the Griersons' massive garden. Everything was dead. Trellises of desiccated vine skeletons were nailed to the back wall. It looked like a vegetable torture chamber. She saw him looking and dropped her hand to her side. The keys jangled in her hand. "Lovely," said Boyd of the Midnight Garden. She looked at it and her lip curled distastefully. "Don't you like it?" She shrugged a shoulder. "What's the point of it?" "Making something." He smiled. "The point is a lovely garden." She nodded reluctantly. "Yeah. I've never seen a gardener enjoy a garden, have you? It's never finished. They can't stop. It's work that makes work. Bit bloody pointless to me." He felt weird hearing her say that. It sounded so nihilistic, so contrary to all the given values in this place. They looked at each other in the dark, her face up to meet his, her eyes sad initially, becoming amused as the look lasted too long to mean nothing. "What are we doing here?" asked Boyd. "Having a dirty little fuck?" She laughed, self-mocking, sweet. And he realised the sinister overtone was just a mixture of coke and tiredness and worry because he'd never done this before. But he was enjoying it. And he'd done it now. And it wasn't going to get any better or worse if he left right away. And she had made him come, so he sort of owed her. "Let's go inside," he said. She squinted down the garden. "You sure? You're married. I'm not." "Is that an issue for you?" She looked at the keys in her hand, separating them, laying them out on her palm. "I've decided. I'm leaving. I don't belong here anymore. I don't know where I do belong, but not here. Tonight I just want a bit of a high and a little fuck." She looked at him pleadingly. "No bullshit afterwards." Something had happened to her. He could see it in her eyes. She'd had an affair and got burned. Boyd thought maybe the man told his wife. The wife would be angry. The wife would have blamed Susan, and all she wanted was a fuck and a bit of tenderness, and it was a damn shame. Boyd bent down to kiss her on the lips. As he did, he felt a salt glaze of dried sweat crack on the back of his neck. His t-shirt, heavy with perspiration from the evening's work, peeled away from one of his underarms. Boyd wanted more coke. He wanted a bit of tenderness and a nice, uncomplicated fuck that didn't have to be negotiated for with promises of time back for yoga practice. He wanted those things so much it didn't occur to him to wonder why Miss Grierson was moved to fuck a sweaty married guy on the floor of her mother's conservatory, next to a hole in the floor that was shaped like an open grave. 3 fire engines were already addressing the blaze, but here came another. The 4th engine, heard in the distance, was coming from another station. The ear-splitting alarm came closer and closer until it was so loud Ian felt it in his eyes. The Sailor's Rest was spewing smoke and flames out into the night. Firemen in beige jumpsuits unravelled hoses, adopting long-rehearsed formations around the engines. A warning call, lost in the howl of the fire, heralded the water, and they fired it over the roof, controlling it. Fresh water. It was useless. Ian was wet. He didn't know if it was sea or spray from the hose. He leaned against the side of the building, facing the fire, his eyes smarting, his feet numb. He watched, oblivious to the firemen shouting at him to get out of the street. He ignored the police who arrived after the fire had been put out, when the smoke was thin and miserly and the street awash with blackened water. He stayed as the ambulances arrived, 2 of them, and he watched them load the black body bags, one big, one small, and he watched them leave. And by then it was 3 a.m, and he didn't know if he could stand any more. His feet were numb, his knees buckled. He slid onto his side on the cold, wet pavement. She began to gnaw through his chest. Chapter 22. Mauro liked to get into the office 10 minutes early to clear her head of shopping lists and resentments, politics and bullshit, to read reports and think. Reading and thinking were unquantifiable in budgetary terms, so she had to do them in her own time. It was rare nowadays with the boys up so early, but she'd managed it today. She tapped her computer out of sleep mode and opened her email. A Met report of yesterday's interview with Maria Arias. Maria admitted meeting with Roxana Fuentesilla the evening before. Roxana came to her house here in Chesterfield Gardens, Mayfair. Roxana was upset because she had argued with her partner, Robin. She missed her London friends and needed a chat with a girlfriend. You know how girls are. Mauro despised Arias's faux girlishness. She was kicking 50 up the arse, for Christ's sake. Ms. Arias was at pains to point out to the officers that Mr. Walker was much younger than her friend and probably just after her money. Arias knew that Roxana Fuentesilla had no money of her own, but the Met officers didn't know. They hadn't been briefed about Arias putting up the money for the business in Glasgow, so they hadn't questioned her any further about it. They hadn't asked anything useful. They just listened to her excuses and left. An addendum to the Met report was marked Controlled Access and warned D.I. Alec Mauro not to divulge the information in it to her crew or anyone not specifically notified by the investigation team. She had to type in her warrant card number and personal password to get it open. It informed her that the fraud office were on the brink of seizing the Arias' bank accounts, business and private. This department did know that Arias had put up the money for the Glasgow business, and they wanted it all back. As soon as Fuentesilla was located, dead or alive, they were to be notified immediately. Mauro read the addendum again. Police Scotland wouldn't be getting any of the proceeds. The money was being ring-fenced for either fraud or the Met. She couldn't work out which. On the last page of the same secret report, there was a one-word response to Mauro's speculation about Fuentesilla's disappearance, the deliberate use of the 7-year sleeping period and the transfer of property back after the declaration of death under Scots law. Unlikely. They hadn't even bothered to capitalise it. She googled the book from Delahunt's desk the day before, Property Trusts and Succession, and followed a link to the Presumption of Death Scotland Act 1977. A summary of the legislation said that the person had to be missing for 7 years with no sightings. The declaration could be raised earlier, but there had to be good reason to assume they had died. The action could only be raised by someone who had been resident in Scotland for a year. She couldn't see Robin Walker staying on if Roxana was missing long term. Mauro's guess was that they'd be counting on Delahunt, which meant he was in it up to his ears. They had set it up perfectly. Roxana had to disappear under suspicious circumstances so they could argue later that she had died, but not suspicious enough to prompt an investigation. Serious crime wouldn't normally be investigating an abandoned car. They were only involved because of the proceeds trail. She felt she'd stumbled on an as yet uncharted scam, but the Met had deemed it
unlikely. She shut the file as requested and watched as the system locked it. She had 3 minutes of thinking time left before the start of her shift. She sat with her face in her hands and tried to imagine a timeline for Roxana's disappearance. Roxana got up and got the kids ready. Danny. Shit. Roxana got up and Danny. Shit. Danny got up and got the kids ready and... Mauro looked up. Do it now. She phoned the Southern General and asked for his ward. A nurse told her that Danny was stable. He'd had a good night. She carried on describing the nature of his good night. Good respiration, no complications from surgery, but Mauro was lost in the familiar phrase. Her oldest son had died when he was 2.5. A good night was her fondest hope at one time. Just for one nurse or a doctor to smile at her when she came in to take over from Brian. For someone to say Gerald had a good night instead of, unfortunately, and I'm afraid. Danny McGrath didn't deserve good nights, but Mauro reminded herself that health was nothing to do with justice. The nurse said she could visit her brother but would need security clearance and would have to stand outside a physical barrier. Mauro thanked him and asked what had happened. Danny had been stabbed with a chair leg. His spleen had been removed. No, it wasn't an essential organ. Mauro hung up, feeling slightly less guilty than before. 3 days ago, Roxana got up and got the kids ready and drove them to school. She fought with the kids in the car. Was their father having an affair? Maria was attractive. Roxana dropped the kids and drove to London to confront Maria. She came back late, overnight, but didn't go home to see her kids or phone to reassure them. She went to an empty field in Helensburgh and evaporated. Mauro moved on to the file on the body in the loch yesterday. She ran and reran the footage from the golf course security camera for the morning. It told an interesting story. The forensics on Mr. Cole's boat had found clumps of the dead woman's hair trapped in a cleat on the deck. They were testing for blood residue, but the boat had been hosed down. Gruesome photographs of the body in situ, on the dock, then lying on a slab. She was mumsy, Glaswegian. She looked like every dumpy woman in every queue in every supermarket in the city. The night shift had checked. Her fingerprints were not on file, and no one fitting her description had been reported missing. Mauro pulled up the effects photographs. She looked again at a thumbnail of the Injury Claims for You lanyard. Another scaled photograph was a close-up of a necklace she had been wearing. It was a gold chain, nothing special, with a crucifix and a Star of David threaded together. Mixed marriage or hedging her bets on the afterlife, maybe. The report on Fuentesilla's car was more interesting. The food bag from the glove box had nearly 2 grams of what, superficially, was cocaine. It was enough for a fairly extravagant night, or a long drive back from London, but it was a personal use amount. It wasn't enough for a dealer. There were a couple of good prints on the outside of the bag, and they had been lifted and were being run this morning. Mauro was right about one thing. The car had been cleaned with alcohol wipes. Mauro sat back and closed her eyes. Wipes were professional, but only quite professional. It would have been less clumsy to leave no trace, no alcohol residue. The clumsiness could be deliberate, so that Delahunt had suspicious circumstance to support an early declaration of death. But maybe she was giving them too much credit. Maybe it was unlikely. She dialed Simmons' office number, realising after the first ring that it was 7 a.m. and Simmons probably wouldn't be in. But Simmons did answer, helloing with a resigned sigh. "Simmons? I was going to leave a message. I didn't think you'd be in yet." "I'm not in yet. I haven't been home yet. We had a fire in the town. 2 dead,
Father and young daughter.
Oh, God, I'm sorry.
Yeah, said Simmons.
Domestic?
Commercial property.
Insurance claim?
Morrow asked, hopefully. Unlikely. The owner had remortgaged his house to pay for building works. They were nearly finished. He was inside with his daughter and they died in the fire.
Accelerant?
Lots. Fire service say there were petrol fumes everywhere, but we'll have to wait for chemical analysis to be sure. Anyway, what did you call for? Is it urgent? Because I'd like to get back.
Sure.
Morrow sat back.
The golf course body traces back to our case. We'll be taking it.
Simmons was so relieved that she sounded almost pleasant, but not quite. When Morrow told her she was about to interview Andrew Cole, Simmons grunted OK and hung up. Morrow walked briskly through the front lobby, down past the locker rooms to the back bar and the holding cells. The desk sergeant was at his post, bright and perky despite being at the end of a long night shift.
Ma'am?
Is Andrew Cole awake yet? He glanced at a computer screen below the lip of the desk.
There he is, having a wee cup of tea.
Morrow slipped around the back of the desk and looked at the screen. Andrew Cole was sitting on a bare plastic mattress, sipping from a large tin mug. What happened to his bedsheets?
Had to take them out.
George looked at the night log on another screen, running his finger down to the right entry.
At 5:08 a.m, when Mr. Cole became very disturbed and there was some concern for his safety.
He smiled and looked up. Morrow was surprised. Suicide watch? George gave a dismissive wave.
Very briefly. Probably the wrong call, but better safe than sorry.
Back on the screen, Cole sipped from his mug. He seemed calm now. What was he doing to make you think that? George read again.
A lot of shouting and swearing, banging on the cell door. Said he couldn't stand it. Wanted his mum to die. Mad stuff like that.
He shook his head.
Wee bit of concern. It passed quickly. He's never slept since then.
On the screen, in a fog of grainy grey, Andrew Cole took another sip and looked into his mug of tea. If he was on suicide watch, the tea would be lukewarm at best. Still, he cupped it between two hands, trying to warm himself.
End of CD 5. CD 6.
Chapter 23. Ian hadn't slept. He didn't have an appointment. He had just turned up at Dr. Nyman's early morning surgery. Dr. Nyman. The name had rolled around and around his head all the way back to town. It became an anchor, a thing to think. Dr. Nyman. He couldn't think those other names, her and him, the black bags. He couldn't. He'd spent the night walking, taking the Gairloch Road, following the water. He walked blindly for hours, through woods and towns, past marinas, inland to hillsides, always following the same road. His feet were numb. It rained. He was wet, and then he was dry again. He didn't remember turning around, but he was heading back towards the town as the sun came up. He sat down in the surgery waiting room. For a moment it felt wonderful, as if his hips and thigh bones were melting into the seat, but then a spurt of adrenaline forced him to his feet again and made him pace. It wasn't easy to move around. There were a lot of people waiting, workers and Navy staff, kids in school uniform, feet to step over. He did a couple of circuits of the central island of chairs until the receptionist called his name, waving him over to the doctor's office door. He passed the receptionist and saw that he was scaring her. Was he moving too fast? No, he thought. No. Dr. Nyman. Dr. Nyman. She waved him down the corridor to the doctor's office. Ian was moving normally, but maybe he was a bit alarming. His manner was alarming because he was coming apart. Dr. Nyman stood up at his desk when Ian slid into the room. The doctor was scared too. "Mr. Fraser," said Dr. Nyman, his German accent lending a clipped, ordered tone to the name. "Have you been burnt?" Ian stared at him, his mind blank, feeling behind himself for the wall. Conscious suddenly of the blackness of his hands smearing the wood chip behind him, he let go. Adrift, he reached for the chair, the patient's chair, at an angle to Dr. Nyman's desk. Ian held the back of it and used it as a guide rope to pull himself in. He dropped onto the chair, feeling his hip bones melt again. "Were you in the fire, Mr. Fraser?" "No, near." "I can see that very clearly. You are covered in blackness, Mr. Fraser." "Blackness?" "Soot." Dr. Nyman stayed on his feet, talking over Ian. He was very tall and thin. Ian found it was easier to talk to his stomach. His eyes were hard to look into. "Please, may I examine you?" Ian sat limp while the doctor checked his forearms for burns, listened to his heart, took his blood pressure. He was used to this, allowing himself to be examined, sitting while prison doctors took bloods and checked his balls for lumps. Handing over responsibility for the chaotic tangle of threads to someone else was a relief, if only for a moment. The doctor asked him to lift his polo shirt, and he breathed on the metal disc of his stethoscope before placing it on Ian's chest. He said something about cold. "Haven't got a cold," said Ian. The doctor listened. Then he took the plugs out of his ears and asked Ian to lift his shirt at the back so he could listen. "I said this was cold. I just breathe on it, like this." He gave a little puff. Ian couldn't see him. He was behind him now. "And it warms it a little bit." The metal disc was on his back. Ian could feel her in there, no longer writhing and angry. She was bigger, grown, gnawing joylessly. Ian imagined the grind of her jaws, her face tight and tired. "I hear just a very slight crackle, Mr. Fraser, not low down. It could be a little smoke inhalation. How's your back?" "Still sore. Here." He reached up between his shoulder blades and drew the hand down his back. "And now I've got pain here." He touched his side. The doctor nodded and frowned. "How long for? The pain in the side?" It sounded innocent, but Dr. Nyman was a ponderous man. "A few days." "Are you coughing?" "A bit, but I've been smoking again, so..." "Ah, no. You must stop. Promise me." Ian shrugged and muttered that he would. Dr. Nyman nodded as if that was agreed and sat down in his chair. He began to write something on the computer. Ian felt a burst of sudden pride, noticing for the first time that he had managed to bring himself here to the doctor. The thing inside him would hate that. He'd had the presence of mind to do that. Ian realised then that the doctor was looking at him, had spoken to him, and he wasn't responding. "Sorry," said Ian. "You are dishevelled and smell heavily of smoke," said Dr. Nyman, precise about his diction. "You were at the fire last night?" The doctor's eyes narrowed. He knew Ian's history. He knew he'd been in prison. He suspected him. "I was at the dinner dance. I saw the smoke and went down." The doctor nodded, encouraging him to say more, but Ian had no more to say. "I went down," he repeated. "My best friend, niece,
in fire. Died.
He stopped talking, understood the impossibility of being heard, of articulating a loss so deep. And he knew it didn't matter anyway, explaining. And he sat for a bit, his blackened hands open on his knees like a beggar. He looked up after a while and found the doctor still nodding and waiting. Everyone complained about doctor's appointments being short, but this felt interminable. Eventually, the doctor said, "So, what brought you here to see me today?" Slug in my lungs, snakes in lung. Ian didn't know how to express it.
Upset.
Would you say you are depressed, perhaps? Ian got stuck on the word perhaps. He meant to draw the doctor's attention to the word, how odd it sounded, but the doctor took it as confirmation. And you seem a little confused also. He raised his eyebrows in a question. Is that the case, would you say? He was right. Ian was confused. Ian nodded.
I am.
Did you stay at the fire all night?
I was there all night. I couldn't.
A wave rolled up from the base of his spine, engulfing him in sorrow, throwing him forward over his knees, cranking great, dry sobs up from his balls. He waited for tears to come out of his face, but none did. It was stuck in his throat. He sat up and found the doctor's hand on his. It was inappropriate, not the gesture of a doctor to a patient, but a kindness from one person to another, and it was a comfort.
I don't know, burbled Ian. I don't know what.
You are overwhelmed.
I am.
I think you have had a very upsetting night.
I have.
You had one psychotic episode before, when you were in prison? Gripped with the sudden conviction that the doctor was going to put him in hospital, Ian stood up and knocked the chair over.
I'm okay.
But the doctor didn't get up or try to wrestle him to the ground. He didn't call prison officers from outside the door to restrain him, or inject antipsychotics that made the world move slower and his feet heavy. The doctor just sat where he was and looked straight at Ian. This could be a recurrence. We have to be prepared for that. But it might not be. Everyone is very upset by this fire. Many patients. You have to know that you are not alone. And then Ian saw, or thought he saw, a tear well up in the doctor's eye. But the doctor looked at his computer screen and blinked a lot, and when he looked back, it was gone. Mr. Fraser, please, sit down on the chair. Following orders, Ian righted the chair, sat down, didn't know what to do with his legs, tried crossing them but got confused and gave up. I would like to write you a prescription for one day only, yes? Ian nodded dumbly. The doctor pointed at the screen. Have you taken this medication before? Ian nodded. He'd had it before and it was a nice sleep he got with it. He didn't get it on prescription, though. So, I want you to take, the doctor was writing on his computer, tip-tap, tip-tap, one pill, 3 times today, again in the morning, and come to see me tomorrow morning. We will see if the anxiety abates. Do you know what I mean by that?
Goes away,
said Ian, a little insulted. Yes, goes away. And I want you to be very careful with yourself. I want you to make sure that you sleep and eat regularly, okay? A pink prescription rolled out of the printer. The doctor took a silver fountain pen out of his top jacket pocket, wrote on the paper, and handed it to Ian. Ian went to take it, but the doctor didn't let go of his end. He made Ian look at him. Go and get these from the chemist now. Take one and only one. Go home and wash and try to sleep. When you wake up, take another one. Then a third pill, you will take it tonight. Do you understand?
Yes.
Tomorrow, I would like you to take the last one and come back first thing, 9 a.m. Am I clear?
Yes.
Come back and see me. He stood up, lifting a hand to the door. Ian looked at the hand, read it, and, oh, he understood. He was to get up also. He did. Then the doctor shook his hand. You have witnessed a horrific thing, Mr. Fraser. It has been a bad night for everyone. You must look after yourself today, and be careful. Ian saw the doctor's eyes then, saw that Dr. Nyman understood the horror of what Ian had seen and why he stayed at the fire. Ian felt heard, and he felt better. He left the surgery, walking through a back street that smelled of burnt paper and hair. The smell of the fire clung to the town, sticking to walls and streets despite the wind's best efforts. Ian slunk downhill to a chemist, clutching a paper promise of succour. He kept his eyes down and passed a bank, a grocer's, a charity shop. He stopped at a newsagent's window, a poster for the local paper. Fire kills too. Hell mourns. Chapter 24. Before the questioning began and the tapes had been installed, Andrew Cole said he definitely didn't want a lawyer. Now, when they asked him to say it again for the benefit of the tape, he didn't sound sure. Morrow and Kerrigan sat across from him, waiting for the answer. Cole looked anxiously at the tape recorder, an ominous black plastic machine fitted to the wall. Morrow knew that a hesitant answer on the tape could make the court think the accused had been leaned on. Sometimes the sharper accused were deliberately ambivalent or upset at interview, knowing they might give themselves later grounds for appeal. She didn't know Andrew Cole, but suspected that he would have access to lawyers with the time and motivation to read the files before they came in for interviews. Mr. Cole, if you've changed your mind, please feel free to tell us and we'll stop the interview right now. No, he said finally. Sorry, I don't want one. Okay, you sure now? Yes. Not too late to change your mind? He seemed to relax at that, as if all he had wanted was reassurance. Fine. He gave Kerrigan a charming smile, sat back and opened his hands to Morrow. Ask me anything. Morrow glanced at her notes. An odd, boyish wee man. He didn't seem to have a grasp on the shitstorm about to engulf him, but he'd been in prison before. He couldn't be entirely naive. Mr. Cole, you called the police yesterday. And I must... He interrupted her and turned to the tape machine on the wall. Sorry, he told it, but I must apologise for yesterday and, you know. He looked back at Morrow, asking whether they might just keep this between them and perhaps not tell the tape machine he'd been spliffed. Please? You called the police, said Morrow patiently, from the boat. Can you tell me what happened there? Mr. Cole smiled warmly and nodded, as if they had agreed to collude in covering up his parole violation. He launched into a prepared story about being told to go out and clear some dead wood floating in view of the course, unsightly debris in the water. There had been a storm earlier in the week and some branches had come down. Andrew did as he was told. He was fishing some branches out when he saw a foot in the water by the bank. Thinking it was a shop dummy, he went over to try to pull it out. He got closer and realised it was human and thought she was a suicide. But then he saw, you know. He ran a flat hand over the top of his head, cringing beneath it, looking sick. His body language was right for an accidental find. She wondered if he could have blacked out and killed her. What made you think of suicide? Well, the south end of the loch is a terribly small place, really. If anyone goes missing, everyone knows about it. We'd all be watching out for someone if there had been an accident of some kind. Tell me a bit about yourself, Andrew. I understand you've been in prison. Unfortunately, yes. Mr. Cole gave a solemn nod. What were you convicted of? Well, sadly, he said, as if it was a stage direction for his performance, possession of cocaine. Morrow grinned at his expression. That is very sadly. Yes, it is. He made himself look sadder yet, unaware that he was being mocked. A very great shame. A shame that you got caught? Asked Kerrigan sharply. She was less charmed by him than Morrow. No, officer. It's a shame that I did that. I had every chance, you know. Great school, great family. He held his hands up helplessly. Threw it all away. Morrow was enjoying Mr. Cole's performance. Not because his act was particularly credible, more that it was a refreshing change from cursing and silence or threats of violence. She wanted to prompt him into saying other daft things, but they didn't really have the time. So you did 3 years of a 6-year sentence. That's a lot of time. But I got out early. Exemplary behaviour. 3 years, though. Serious offence. He wobbled his head ambivalently. There were a lot of extrajudicial factors in the sentence being so harsh. Kerrigan was exasperated. Did you resist arrest? No, I mean political factors. Reasons why my sentence was so long. My family know a lot of people in the judiciary. Bad blood. Kerrigan sucked her pointy little teeth with annoyance. Morrow watched his eyes flicker around the table as he theorised. The truth was that Cole got a stiff 6 years because he'd had so much cocaine on him. All sentencing was carefully monitored for parity. Judges couldn't make it up on whim. Cole really believed, though, that it was about who knew who and what they thought about him and his family. He was in an odd little world of his own, a charming one, compelling because it was so jarring, like stumbling across a bizarre foreign language soap opera. Mr. Cole, what I'm wondering about is who let them in. He smiled and shook his head. Sorry, what? Morrow spoke slowly. Who let them in? To the golf course. Who gave them the code to get into the grounds? A titter of polite confusion. So sorry. Morrow sighed and stared him out. You trashed your cell this morning. Another titter. Sadly. Sadly, the golf course don't let anyone in without the code or a visual ID from security staff. They've got CCTV film of a blue van with the plates covered up stopping at the service gates that morning. An arm comes out of the window and types the security code into the keypad. Mr. Cole looked confused. He opened his mouth to speak, but thought better of it. We checked with estates management. They didn't ask you to go out and clear debris from the water. Well, very quietly now, it is part of my job. You said you'd been sent out to clear debris. You weren't. You went out because you knew something was out there. I did not. You knew she was there. Did you kill her? No. God, no. Take her out in the boat and kill her? No.
I'm not capable. OK. If you just tootled out yesterday to do a wee job, there'd be no traces of her on your boat. But forensics found her hair trapped under a cleat. They're looking for traces of blood now, but they said the deck had been hosed down. If she was anywhere near your boat before she died, they'll find out. Cole was badly shaken, and Morrow felt that now was a good time to draw his eye to a way out. Look, Andrew, when someone unaccustomed goes to prison, they're befriended by people they wouldn't normally be friends with. Sometimes, after the sentence is over, those relationships are used to make them do things. He looked wary. People, she prompted again. Nice people like yourself, and we see this a lot, get caught up in things. But Andrew was refusing to move towards the open door. He knew it was there, she could see that, but he had decided not to name and blame. It's a very prestigious golf course, said Morrow. I'm quite surprised they'd give a job in a tithe cottage to someone with your record. Well, he shook his head. It was my mother. She got you the job there. She knows everyone. It was a favour. Have you been dealing cocaine to members of the club? Fuck no. She knew he hadn't. The club wouldn't tolerate a stoner with a criminal record dealing on the premises. They would tolerate a dealer-waiter or a groundsman dealing, as long as he was discreet and got the members what they wanted. See, this can be big or this can be small. Depends how willing you are to give us information. Who did you give the security code to? He wouldn't say a name. Mr. Cole, we can just go through a list of names in Shotts Prison and see who you've been in touch with. My own guess is you texted the code to someone. He put a clenched fist over his mouth, elbow on the table, red-rimmed eyes staring furiously at the wall. You won't say a name. Maybe you're afraid. His eyes flashed up at her, angry at the suggestion. She pretended not to have noticed. I see. Can we agree that you gave the code to someone? It'll save me calling up your phone records. He nodded. She made him say yes for the tape, even though they were being filmed. It was good to get them to speak. Did you agree with this unnamed party that you'd go out on your boat and accidentally find the body? His face flushed pink suddenly, and he shouted at the table, I didn't know what was going to happen! She could picture him trashing his cell now, cornered and desperate and feeling he had nothing to lose. Cole couldn't cope with being held responsible for his actions. It was his weak spot. She patted the table in front of him rhythmically, as if it was his back. Andrew, it's okay, it's okay. He looked to her, saw that she was still framing him as an object of concern. His panic abated. It's okay, she said again, giving him a tissue out of her pocket. He blew his nose with a comical little purp that left him shuddering. Everything about Cole was small and sweet and unthreatening. She thought about him ripping his cell apart this morning, doing a long sentence, cleaning his house of drug paraphernalia before going out to look for a dead body in the water. Police interviews were intense. Like a job interview or a first date, people were profoundly self-conscious because a bad impression could have lifelong consequences. The pressure meant that they often presented themselves paradoxically, and instead of brushing over flaws, insisted the opposite. No one fucks with me usually meant people have been fucking with me. I don't care what anyone thinks meant I care what everyone thinks. Thinking about that made Morrow consider her own frantic insistence that she didn't care about her brother. The admission made her mood drop. She looked up again.
Here was Mr. Cole telling and retelling the same story about himself in different ways. I'm a harmless little man. I'm Mr. Mole. All my sins are crimes of omission and good faith. I'm not to blame and I am sorry. Are you going to name the person you gave the code to? He shook his head, remembered the tape and said, No. Because you're afraid of them? He smiled. No. There was no fear in there. Ridicule, perhaps, but not for the person he'd given the code to. The ridicule was for Morrow. Why won't you tell me their name? He drew a parallel line back and forth on the tabletop with his finger. Mr. Cole's paradox was that he was not chaotic. He was calculating. He was going back to prison and knew what it meant to go back as a grass. It meant a full sentence in segregation units, years in the segs with no one for company but child rapists and the nutters who wouldn't survive Gen Pop. He wasn't chaotic, and he wasn't going to budge. Okay, she said softly. Tell me what you did. You texted the code, let them in, and what, met them? No. He'd worked this out in the night, a legalistic version of the story that would make him the hapless patsy. I texted someone the code. Lots of people on the estate do that. But I stayed in my house. And? What did you think was going to happen? I'd said they could come in and use my boat. I thought they were dropping something. He broke off, lost in considerations of parole violations, admissible and inadmissible facts. I'm not interested in what you thought, Andrew, said Morrow. What actually happened? When he spoke, his voice was deeper and sadder. He sounded his age. I was in my house, in bed, and I heard a scream. It woke me. They'd asked me to leave the key on the boat. I thought they were going to drop something. But then I heard her scream. I knew. I stayed indoors. I heard the boat go out and heard it come back. I stayed in. I was in all day. I was hiding in the back room. I heard them leave, but it took me a whole day to come out. I went to look at the boat. Blood. Everywhere. There doesn't seem to be blood there now. Washed it. Hosed it. Why? He shrugged one shoulder. Did you know her? He shook his head. Can you say that for the benefit of the tape, please, Andrew? Bitch! I did not know her! His eyes were so narrow they were watering. He caught himself, widened his eyes and acted as if he hadn't said it. But she'd seen him now, the real Andrew Cole, a bitter, angry little man who wasn't going to be told what to do by filth like her, or sympathised with by filth like her, or ordered around by filth like her. She dropped the sympathetic mask and looked at him, cold. You're going back to prison. Morrow smiled warmly because they both knew what that meant. He would be ordered around by filth like her. He would be watched as he sat on the toilet by filth like her. He would have to beg filth like her for soap and shampoo and plastic forks. And he was going there for a long time. They sat for a moment, she smiling, watching all the fight go out of him. Why did you stay indoors for a whole day? He took a deep breath. Andrew, you must have known. Otherwise, why'd you have to get off your face to go out looking for her? He looked despairingly at the ceiling. Fat, self-pitying tears rolled down his spoiled, boyish face.
I didn't. It was that scream. Wasn't a normal scream. Not a person scream. Like an animal. Like an animal in a trap.
Chapter 25. Shoppers stared at Ian in the busy chemist shop. He was sitting in a chair beneath the high pharmacy counter, waiting for his prescription. He didn't care that they were staring. He looked a mess, but he didn't care because the doctor had touched his hand and was upset too. He wasn't alone. The doors to the street crashed open. A skinny guy, young, Ian didn't know him, stormed straight for the counter. He was limping, swinging his arms, and scattered the women looking at makeup. Methadone. Stamping from foot to foot, he leaned all his weight on the counter, lifting his feet off the floor, clucking. The pharmacist asked if he'd like to come to the cubicle, but, "Just geese it, I'm fucking ganting." He necked the clear green liquid from the measuring cup. Ian watched the makeup-perusing women leave, muttering, gossiping. They'd know the boy's family, who he belonged to, the whole backstory. The boy was thin. Even his tongue looked thin as it rolled around inside of the plastic cup, licking the residue from the ridged bottom. He went to put it down but spotted another little green pool and lifted it to lick again. Then he dropped it on the counter, gave the pharmacist an angry glare and stormed out, slamming the door again as he left. The pharmacist waited until the doors were shut and he'd passed the window. She looked at the measuring cup. Bending down, she lifted a small bin and used her elbow to knock the empty cup into it, catching Ian's eye. "Saliva," she explained, disgusted. She looked at him, hopeful, and said, "Are you a fireman?" Ian didn't answer. She decided he was and started to cry. "Oh my God," she said, hoarse. "That Leanne Ray. My God, she was a right wee ticket." They couldn't look at each other. They stayed still, an ocean of shop between them until the door to the street opened and a woman came in. They each hid their faces. Ian's prescription arrived in a neat paper bag. He wanted to take a pill in the shop, but thought he might remind the pharmacist of the methadone addict. He liked being mistaken for a good guy. He thanked her and walked casually out of the shop. Outside, he ducked down a lane, around a corner, standing by the bins, ripped the paper bag open and took out the smoked glass bottle. He pressed down on the lid, felt the mechanical whir, a clock being wound to work again. It was quite a big pill, but he swallowed it dry. It lodged in his throat, leaving a catch there, and then slid down. The ghost of the pill hurt his throat. He swallowed again. Was it down? Probably. If it was any good, it would take 10 minutes. If it was no good, after 20 minutes he could always take another one. He went out onto the street and started to walk slowly, watching his feet, gauging his mood with every step. A little better. A weak sun warmed the street. The smell was lifting. He felt a little better. He felt calm enough to lift his head and look around. A cluster of women at a street corner looked tearfully down to the waterfront and talked in low voices, hands covering their mouths. Pensioners in the cafes looked sad and worn. Even 4x4 drivers looked upset and craned to see the fire brigade tape at the end of Sinclair Street. He walked down towards the water. On the esplanade, a block away from the blackened Sailor's Rest, stood a mobile police unit with shiny aluminium stairs down into the street. A cop on guard outside looked expectantly around the street, but no one would meet his eye. His hands were clasped behind his back, his feet splayed. He'd been there for a while. Ian saw a man steer his wife away, making her cross the street. No one would make a move until Mark Barrett got back. The town was waiting for orders. Ian had no right to feel righteous. He wasn't doing anything either. He was no better than them. Annie and Eunice were all that was left. Ian couldn't believe he hadn't thought of them before now. The grannies would be distraught. He turned uphill and headed east, squeezing the pill bottle in his pocket, willing the medication to dull his perception. Across the road, through a charity shop window display of crystal vases and dun pewter tankards, Susan Grierson watched him wish. Chapter 26. Cadogan Street was in the old commercial district of Glasgow city centre. Monumental Victorian office buildings in blood-red sandstone faced off across narrow streets. They were tall, blank and imposing. Busy with early morning commuters, the street was a bland string of doorways into the bright lobbies of dull commercial enterprises, the tedium broken by occasional sandwich bars and coffee shops. Office windows above crackled with rancorous strip lights. The Injury Claims for You office was through a glass door. The concierge had been told to expect them first thing, and he let them in, directing them across a grey lobby. "Early," he said vaguely, nodding at his watch. It was 10 to 8 in the morning. They needed to talk to the injury office staff, but 2 of them already had other jobs. They had agreed to come in before work. The concierge led them to a cramped afterthought of a lift. 8th floor, the only door on the landing. The doors slid shut and the lift rose slowly. The 8th floor made the grey lobby downstairs look glamorous. A chipped door sagged open. It was painted in battleship grey emulsion and had a metal strip on it that read, "I for you." They stepped into a reception area that looked and smelled as if someone had been chain-smoking in it for 30 years. Everything was tinged brown. The carpet, the desk, the chair. Even the pale blue Hessian walls were overlaid with yellow. "Didn't expect this," said Morrow quietly. "Not at all." She had imaged sleek, handsome Roxana in quite a different workplace. Somewhere with glass partitions, designer furniture and other office luxuries like breathable air. "No wonder they don't like Glasgow," said McGrain, his civic pride offended by the state of the place. Looking at the office, it seemed obvious that Fuentesilla had always intended to shut it down. If she'd been planning to stay, she would have moved offices. She would have bought furniture. She would have had the place painted, or at the very least, opened a window. "Hello?" called McGrain. A sudden sound of bubbling water caught their attention. They followed the noise around the corner and found a small staff room with a full kettle boiling on top of a small fridge. 3 tea-stained cups were lined up by the kettle, each with a tea bag slumped forlornly in a finger of milk. Looking up at them guiltily from a round table were the 3 staff members they had called in, a woman and 2 men, all in their 20s. A half-eaten packet of bourbon biscuits sat in front of them on the table. Morrow and McGrain introduced themselves and showed their ID badges. Maxine Bradford kept her hands clamped between her knees, as if she didn't fully trust them. She had curly blonde hair and far too much makeup for the hour, or indeed any hour, apart from dress-up night at a social club for clowns. Laurie Whittle held up a hand as he introduced himself, ducking his head as if he was embarrassed. The other 2 were dressed for work, but Laurie was wearing grey tracky bottoms and a sweatshirt. He didn't have a job yet. The third man stood up and straightened his suit jacket. Jim Mooney. He held his hand out to shake and made "you can trust me" eye contact, the convention of his profession. He shook hands with Morrow, then McGrain, and capped it with a habitual but inappropriate "delighted you could come." He knew it was wrong and sat back down, admonishing himself. "OK." Morrow took charge. "Well, thanks very much for coming in so early, all of you. Very kind. We just need a general chat. Can we sit down somewhere?" Mooney offered her his chair and then brought 2 more chairs in from a nearby office, setting them around the table. Tea was offered and refused. The biscuits were offered, and McGrain took one. "Did you find her?" asked Maxine, a little excited. "Is she dead?" McGrain shook his head. "We haven't found Roxana Fuentesilla." "We found someone, but not her." Morrow put a photograph of the Star of David and the crucifix on the table. "Do you recognise this?" They stared at it for a moment. "Is that Hetty's?" Maxine suggested. Laurie touched the picture. "Loads of folk wear that sort of thing." He picked up the photo and handed it back to Morrow, repeating, "Loads of folk wear that sort of thing," as if she hadn't heard him. "Loads of folk who work here." They were shocked at the implication. The woman who was wearing this necklace was found dead. She had this in her pocket. She put the photo of the lanyard on the table. The effect was immediate. Maxine gave off a little scream and said, "Oh my God!" Once to Laurie, once to Jim, once to Morrow and McGrain. Laurie blinked back insistent tears and couldn't take his eyes off the picture. Jim took an exact copy of the lanyard out of his pocket and put it on the table. It had an ID badge attached to it with his photo on one side and a magnetic strip for the door entry on the other. "That's for a pass, to get in the front door. We've all got them." Morrow nodded. "Is there a personnel file for Hetty?" Laurie Whittle muttered that he knew where they were. They followed him in a back room where the firm's records were kept. The forensic accountants had been through these files with a camera and sharp eye and found nothing very much at all. Whittle took a file from the grey personnel cabinet. Hester Kirk had been made redundant as soon as Fuentesilla took over. She'd worked out her contract and left 3 weeks ago. A small passport photo was attached at the top right-hand corner of the file. Morrow recognised her as the body in the water. She was chubby, heavy-chested, and wore the necklace in the photo. Her hair was dyed blonde and pulled back in a ponytail. She had the expression of someone caught off guard by an automated photo booth, her mouth loose, one eye slightly closed. Her home address was in Clydebank. Back in the kitchen, Morrow asked who had been here for the longest. Jim said it was him. He'd been here for 1.5 years. An office was found. Jim Mooney sat in a stiff chair holding tight to the sides. "Jim, what can you tell us about what's been going on here?" Jim looked from Morrow to McGrain. "How do you mean?" "Just tell us the story of what's happened here. We'd be interested to know how it looks from your perspective." "OK. He considered the proposition for a moment. "Well, the office is shut. That's all we know." "You were here before Roxana?" "Aye. Bob Ash was the owner before her. Injury claims. That was the business. Not squeaky clean, always, but you probably know that already. It was low-level stuff. Not organised insurance fraud, not really." "We know. We're not really interested in that. We want to know what happened when Roxana got here." "Well," he smacked his lips. "In they come, out he goes. He calls the office together, looking well nervous. Here's your new boss, cheerio. No warning nor nothing. Off he goes to live in Miami." Did that seem like something he'd been planning? "No, but he's got Granwains there. He was back and forth. If he was going anywhere, it was there. No, I mean selling up and leaving.
Not at all. He hasn't even sold his house yet. I know it's still on the market. I see it in the listings in the papers every week.
Where did he live?
Helensburgh. Market's dead out there until after the vote. No one knows what's going to happen, do they?
Morrow got him to write the address down for her. Was the house for sale before he announced he was leaving?
No, he wouldn't sell out there just now. But it seemed like something he couldn't resist. Like he'd been given a big bung to fuck off, excuse me. Then she takes over. Knows nothing about the business except who's on the fiddle and she wants them out.
Hester Kirk.
Hetty was the queen of the scamsters. I'll be frank with you, I loved it when Hetty got the boot. I liked her personally, but she was a robbing fucker, excuse me. I thought we were going straight. There's a good living in this game if you do it right, but if you're willing to do it wrong, there's a killing in it. Hetty was always giving me earfuls about do this, do that, bring your numbers up, you're dragging us down. But it's illegal, you know? Well, of course you know you're the police. I'm not religious or anything. I'm just not a robbing fuck, excuse me. I just don't do that sort of thing. So I'd had a hard time, but then Fuentesilla's coming. Seemed to be cleaning up the business. Got rid of the robbing fucks, excuse me.
Like Hester?
Exactly, like Hetty. She was the first one out. We get paid on commission for claims, you know. Temptation is to pad it out. Hetty gave in to temptation. And backhanders.
He looked guilty suddenly.
It's okay to tell you this, isn't it? Since she's, you know.
Dead?
Aye, dead.
Did Fuentesilla tell you what she was doing? Was there a meeting or anything?
No, but it was obvious because of who got the boot. We all got the message.
Fuentesilla didn't say anything about income or the firm's sources of income or anything like that.
She wouldn't bother to tell us. She's quite snooty, isn't she? Anyway, it's her firm now, so she can do what she likes. But they weren't cleaning it up, were they? Because then they told us all to fuck off, excuse me.
How did Hester Kirk react to being laid off? Jim said Hetty'd been there for maybe 2 years. She was kind of an angry woman anyway, you know, divorced. Her ex was a junkie and tried to rob her a couple of times. Well, now she was furious. Said she'd never get another job like this. Her redundancy package was the legal minimum. Said she wasn't going to take that lying down. She knew all about the business and who was this Spanish cunt anyway, excuse him.
Anyway, we all got our books last week. Rent's paid. Another firm's moving in next week.
Fuentesilla paid you all off?
Aye, last week.
His lip curled.
Never even bothered to tell us face to face. Just left letters and final pay slips on everyone's desk. The rest of us stopped coming in. She's daft, really. I mean, it's a partnership. If the firm goes down with bags of debt, she has to pay them out of her own pocket.
We checked for debts. I thought the firm was square.
Oh, it can't be. Jim smiled. You don't know about her spending spree. All the purchases.
Morrow looked around the poor office. What was she buying?
Land, said Jim. And I only know because Hetty'd told me. Broke into the filing cabinets one night in the back office. She's double wide. Found letters from estate agents, deeds of sale.
Morrow stood up. Can you show me? The back office was across the reception area. Fuentesilla had put her own office as far away from the rest of the staff as possible. Jim opened the door tentatively, as though his Spanish beauty of a boss might still be in there. He reached in and turned the light on. Clean. A glass desk with a purple Bang & Olufsen phone standing upright. A transparent chair. A wall of red filing cabinets with drawers of differing sizes, all with the same designer name on them in steel lettering. The forensic accountants hadn't been in here. Hester had been. She was angry when she searched this office and had used a chisel to jimmy the cabinets open. Papers were scattered all over the floor. Morrow wouldn't have been able to look at them without a warrant, but since it was a suspected break-in, she could look at anything she liked. Morrow and Magrane wandered from pile to pile, touching nothing. Purchase orders and title deeds, conveyancing reports, all for undeveloped land around Scotland's west coast. With the uncertainty in the market right now, prices would have slumped. No one else was buying. Property speculation wasn't criminal, but undeveloped land was one of the few assets that could easily sit untouched for 7 years, accruing nothing but value, until a declaration was applied for and the legal cogs ground into motion. Morrow's phone rang. She answered it. It was D.C. Kerrigan. The fingerprints on the bag of cocaine in Fuentezia's car had come up with a match. Ian Joseph Fraser, currently of Helensburgh, previously of Shotts Prison. They tested the cocaine and found traces of Jaffa cakes in it. Odd. Morrow nodded at Magrane, telling him to distract Jim Mooney. Magrane did as he was told, turning Jim away to ask,
"When did you first notice that Hetty'd broken in here?"
Morrow went out into the corridor. What was he in for? Assault to severe injury, said Kerrigan. Pretty ugly attack. I've sent you his record. Good. Take Thankless, go to Helensburgh and see if you can pick Ian Fraser up. And while you're driving out, call Mr. Halliday at Lurbrack's farm. Ask him if he's sold any undeveloped land recently. She didn't want to ask him herself. She liked the idea of Halliday recklessly campaigning for the next generation at his own expense, but she knew too much about people. Chapter 27. Boyd peeled his sleep-sodden eyes apart just long enough to glance at the bedside clock. 8:10, but that was okay. Helen and Katie were coming in at 9 to do the washing up. They would let the cleaner in and sign for deliveries. It was okay. He dozed, savouring the luxury of an empty bed, of not having to get into work, of his throbbing head and aching muscles. Physically, he felt like shit, but a blowout was exactly what he'd needed. He reran the night backwards, tumbling into bed with Lucy cursing him in her sleep, drinking malt and Miss Grierson's to shave the edge off. Quite bad sex, really. Not actually worth it now it was over. On a dirt floor, with a woman who wasn't half as nice as Lucy. She didn't feel old, but she was quite old. Nausea propelled him upright, his brain sloshing hard against the inside of his skull. He shut his eyes and waited for the pain in them to subside. The boys were screaming along to a high-pitched kids' TV show in the kitchen. He remembered, as he always did at this point, an article in The Observer about hangovers and how someone had proved that regret was a chemical reaction to alcohol ingestion. His calves were tingling, about to cramp. He made himself get out of bed and staggered into the bathroom to run a shower. Standing under the water, soaping Susan's dried saliva off his thighs, he remembered the dental dam in her mouth and the odd, sneaky way she took it out. Had someone complained about it, about her using it, and she'd learned to hide it? No, that didn't seem right. Maybe she had HIV, or thought that he did. No, because afterwards at her house she wasn't careful then. It was odd. The whole night was odd. He listened to the breakfast clatter of Lucy and the kids in the kitchen. They sounded very far away. Boyd was distant from his family in the same way that his father had been distant. He hadn't liked that about his father. When he was young, he thought his father didn't like him. Later, he blamed the church for stealing his father's attention. Later still, he blamed his mother somehow. He saw that coldness now in himself, and wondered if Fraser fathers were destined to be glimpsed only, distant and godlike. He thought of all the family photographs. They went back decades. Presently they were in a cardboard suitcase in the attic. Generations of kids and aunties smiling, fathers reading newspapers in backgrounds, fathers smoking in the distance, fathers behind. He was like those Fraser fathers, distracted, disgruntled, distant. He remembered now why he liked to get arseholed sometimes. This was just the sort of epiphanic self-honesty a blowout prompted in Boyd. He dried himself, holding hard to the realisation, feeling it slip from his mental grasp like the memory of a dream. He was distant, like his father. He didn't want to be. Trying to think of a way of phrasing it, a sentence that would capture the sense of it, he padded into the kitchen. Lucy and the boys, even Jimbo, froze as he came through the door. They were wary of his mood. He smiled. "Morning all," he said, sitting down at the table. Lucy muttered, "Morning," nervously, and went back to pouring out cereal for the boys, shifting her weight so that Boyd couldn't quite see the orange and green box. Boyd didn't approve of that cereal. It was full of colourants and sugar and salt. It was a big box and it was half full. They'd already eaten a lot of it on other days. She must be stashing the box. They were hiding their lives from him, the way he had hidden his from his father, the way he and his mother conspired to keep the worst from the Reverend Robert. Tickets for rock concerts, Reeboks. "Too much for sand shoes," his father had said. A pang of chemical regret shot through Boyd. He didn't want this for himself and his boys. He stood up suddenly, making Lucy flinch. Reaching into the cupboard, he took down a bowl and held it out for Lucy to pour him a helping too. The boys were watching him, wary. Jimbo skulked out of the room. Boyd tried to catch Lucy's eye. She half smirked as she poured the cereal for him, pouring too much, spilling it over the side and onto the worktop and floor. Boyd picked up the extras from the worktop and held her eye as he put them in his mouth. She smiled, still uncertain, and watched him sit down with the boys. "What happened to you last night?" "I got ruined." He poured the milk in and reached over to the drawer for a spoon. The boys began to bicker silently about who had the most dried strawberries. Lucy dropped her voice. "You were late." He saw her left eye on the brink of a wince. This was the point where he would normally shout, though he couldn't remember why. Lucy was lovely. She deserved better. "Bonding exercise with the staff." He glanced at the kids. "Tell you later." And then he whispered, "I got a deal." Lucy laughed in disbelief but took in his sorry red eyes. It was obvious that he was telling the truth. William was trying to steal a tiny red fleck from his brother's bowl, but little Larry wasn't having it and pinched his wrist. William howled. Lucy reached into the box of cereal and picked out some withered red bits. She dropped them into the kids' bowls. "Now eat what you've got, or I'm taking it away and giving you cornflakes, with no sugar." They spooned it into their mouths, cautious of their mother and suspicious of each other. She whispered to Boyd, "Get me some next time." "I will," said Boyd, relishing the impropriety of saying it in front of the boys. "I'll try today." "Blinking flip!" Lucy's voice cracked with excitement and she went back to her work. Boyd ate the disgusting cereal, making faces at the boys, pretending it was lovely. Behind him, Lucy moved around with unearthly grace, tidying away, wiping down, her movements balletic. Boyd, raw as he was, felt keenly how strange it was to everyone that he was eating with them, making eye contact, not being angry or mean. He felt like a divorced dad who had been forced to stay overnight because his car had broken down or something. He was trying too hard. He stopped and let the boys get on with staring at the TV as they ate. Lucy looked at him and smiled. It was a long time since she had smiled at him like that. He thought about how it must be for her here in Helensburgh. She came from Devon. She had a big gang of friends there, all top girls, all sweet and pretty and fun and lovely. She must feel trapped in this house, his town. She carried on serving them, pouring, wiping, putting tiny vests on radiators so they were nice and warm to slip on. Caring. She came past and Boyd pushed his chair out from the table, wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her onto his knee. Lucy melted into him and he held her, nuzzling into her neck as she kissed his hair. He gave her waist a gentle, appreciative squeeze and she kissed him again, moving to get up, but he held her there, playful, trying to eat his cereal across her lap, dripping milk onto her pyjama trousers and making her laugh, her throaty laugh. Grinning, she got up and poured him a coffee from the pot. Boyd and his boys ate, and then he dressed them in their little warm vests and jumpers and dungarees. Then he put their socks and wellies on and opened the door to let them bomb around the garden with Jimbo. It was a clear day. From the front porch he could see straight down to the glittering water. Lucy came out to join him, sitting in one of the faded blue wicker chairs they had found in the attic. Boyd pulled up the matching chair and sat next to her. He took her hand and they watched their lovely boys in their lovely garden on a lovely morning. "Did you hear about the fire?" Her voice was low, her lips hardly moving. She kept her eyes on the boys, making sure they couldn't hear. "What fire?" "The Sailor's Rest. Burnt down. 2 inside." "Oh, God," he said. But he was thinking about Lucy and how she was. He was thinking about the boys and how everything was going to be better now. He didn't take it in until she said, "The man who owned it and his daughter were inside. They died. Smoke inhalation." Fucking hell. He remembered then Murray and Leanne. He remembered the odd conversation, everyone at odds and Tommy Farmer radiating threats. Lucy looked tearfully across the lawn. "I think they say smoke inhalation because they don't want to say burnt to death, you know? Because that sounds so brutal." "I met them yesterday." "Who?" "The owner and his daughter. I met them. They died." "Yeah." "There was a bloke, a kind of scary bloke, Tommy Farmer. He was sort of menacing them." Boyd was glad he hadn't bought anything off him. If Farmer was involved in a fire setting, then he didn't want anything to do with him. "They must have had debts," said Lucy. "Maybe they tried to burn it down themselves and got stuck, you know, for the insurance." "Maybe." Lucy carried on talking, but Boyd was back at the dinner with the 2 grannies. One of them was supposed to be babysitting Leanne, but Murray had dropped out and given her his ticket. "At the dinner," he said. "She was supposed to be babysitting, the granny, one with a sore leg. But she was there at the dinner dance. Both grannies were there." "What?" Lucy was looking out over the lawn, watching the boys didn't go too far down to the end of the grass and the steep escarpment between the lawn and the garden wall. He explained about the granny, about how she was supposed to be at home with a bad leg or a bladder, but how he met them both there. Fuck, how awful. And God, imagine. They looked down the grass to their boys, squatting in front of a fuchsia bush, watching something in the grass. Awful, said Lucy. God, this town, said Boyd, standing up too quickly, his calves tingling as he tried to straighten his legs. He'd meant to go down to the kids, but he could hardly walk. Lucy laughed as he hobbled down the steps to the lawn. You had a faceful last night, didn't you? Christ on a bike, he said, trying to make light of it. I need more coffee. The boys were running back in anyway, a fight breaking out between them. They clambered onto the porch and plopped down on their bottoms to pull their wellies off. Boyd watched Lucy help them out of their outdoor clothes. Sternly, she promised them 10 minutes of cartoons in the kitchen if they both went to the toilet on their own. Back in the kitchen, Boyd poured himself another cup, drank it in 4 gulps, and slid his arm around Lucy's waist. Fucking love you. You talking to me or the coffee? The coffee. She laughed as he held her, and he felt vibrations from her rumble through him into his belly. Who did you get the deal off? That fat waitress? No. He let go and hid his face in his coffee. It was Susan Grierson. She came into the cafe and asked for work. Grierson? From that big house on Sutherland Crescent? Yeah. Very old Helensburgh family. She's back? Her mother just died, said Boyd, and sipped again, keen to move the conversation on. Not recently, she didn't, said Lucy. Sarah Horton inquired about that house 1.5 years ago, wanted to buy it for the garden. The owner was already dead, but the estate wasn't settled or something. It was a slightly too detailed statement for Boyd to take in. He didn't like Sarah Horton. She was snobby about him being a cook. Lucy could tell he wasn't listening. Boyd, old Mrs. Grierson died 2 years ago. Well, she's just getting around to it now. Settling the estate? I'll tell Sarah then if she's selling. She loves that garden. He held his wife and kissed her softly. Lucy, he whispered, I've been a moody cow recently and I'm sorry. I don't want to be like that. You're not always like that. She patted his back and tried to pull away, but he held on to her. I don't want you to flinch when I come home. She changed then, gave him a warning look and shrugged his arm off. Well, don't come home in a flippin' mood every day then. You're right, he said as she walked past him. I'm sorry. It was a real change of tone for him. They both knew it. She stopped and looked at him. You should get wasted more often, Boyd. Regret suits you. Because Lucy read The Observer too.
End of CD 6.